Welcome to a special edition of JSOnPolitics. It's election night in Wisconsin, in America, and in our newsroom. And this is a special edition of our Thursday show to give you the latest totals and expert commentary from our staff here at the Journal Sentinel. I'm Greg Borowski, PolitiFact Wisconsin editor, and one of your hosts tonight. David Haynes, editorial page editor as well. So David, let's talk a little bit about what we're going to give people tonight. This is the place to be if you want the most up-to-date expert commentary about what's happening.
Absolutely. We've got the best political team in Wisconsin. We'll have Craig Gilbert of our Washington Bureau joining us later, Mary Spicuzza, a reporter on our staff, Dan Bice, a columnist, Patrick Marley and Jason Stein in Madison, Christian Schneider, and James Causey, editorial page columnists.
And if you're watching us on Facebook, we encourage you to share that feed with others so they can watch us as well. If you're watching us online, you can follow along also with all the tweets and things from our staff below us on the Facebook page. So it's a far cry from when you and I started off in the journalism business, when we'd come in. Election day was the slowest day of the year because you'd have a pre-written story, you'd come in late, and you'd write those, top it off because that's all you had time for. Right. Tonight, it's a very different world we're living in.
It is. In fact, back in the day, this was our version of interactivity with our readers. This is a scorecard. In 1952, we published in the Milwaukee Journal, and you could keep track as Dwight Eisenhower, Ike, and Adlai Stevenson fought it out. Eisenhower won that election. We'll see who wins tonight.
And right now, why don't we use that as an opportunity to remind folks we'll be giving you the headlines and the election results every hour and half hour at that point, and often in the midst of the half hour as well. And why don't you start us, Dave, with some of the headlines we've seen so far in the election?
You bet. So the East Coast battleground states right now look very tight. They've not been called, places like Florida and Pennsylvania. Also, the exit polls are showing, no surprise, Greg, that the state and the United States are divided, very divided, after a very bitter election. State polls close in a little less than 30 minutes, 8 p.m. A reminder, if you're still in line when the polls close at 8 p.m., you can still vote. So we still have a ways to go in Wisconsin. And finally, Wisconsin turnout, and in fact turnout in other parts of the country, seems high. We'll know more about that as the night goes on.
Yeah, let's also take a look at the electoral map so far. Now this one, of course, red is the familiar color for the Republicans. The dark red are the states that have been called. There are not a lot of surprises here so far, and the same with the dark blue are the ones for Hillary Clinton. The light blue are the ones where she's leading right now, but some of this can just be very small percentages of the vote. So that map looks quite familiar to the expectations so far. And at this stage anyways, Trump is ahead with 60 to 44 electoral votes.
Yeah, very early. I think my home state, the Hoosier state, Indiana, was called first. That was no surprise. The bigger surprise there seems to be in Indiana that Evan Bayh, the Democrat who was running, might be in some trouble. But we'll keep an eye on that throughout the night. And now we have a little surprise for you. As we were talking earlier, newsrooms have long been the hub of activity on election night. And that certainly is the case tonight. Things have changed. We use social media now. We use iPhones to cover elections. But in 1960, people were still using typewriters and pads and pens. And in 1960, during the primary in April, the Wisconsin primary, it was a hard-fought race between John Kennedy, the future president, the senator from Massachusetts, and Hubert Humphrey, a senator from Minnesota. And that night, as was the case around the country during primary season, the candidates would gather in the Metro daily to await the returns. So we went back and took a look at that, and we're going to show you a quick video on that right now. It was a hard-fought race, and it wasn't clear who would win when John F. Kennedy, the charismatic senator from Massachusetts, stepped off the elevator that night and walked into the Milwaukee Journal city room. It was April 5, 1960, election night, and he and his rival, Senator Hubert Humphrey, were waiting to see who had won the all-important Wisconsin primary. They held forth all night amid a gaggle of reporters from around the country, from radio, print, and TV. That's how it was done in those days. The candidates came to the major newsrooms, and they waited. The Journal described it this way. The floor, which normally shows only a few cigarette butts and paper clips, writhed with coaxial cables and other wires of assorted sizes. Television cameras, monitors, and amplifiers formed roadblocks which presented only momentary challenges to the scores of cameramen. Just a tranquil domestic scene in the Milwaukee Journal city room, said Sander Van Oker, the legendary NBC newsman. As the night wore on, the city room got hotter and bluer with cigarette smoke. Finally, at 12:30 a.m., Kennedy returned to the city room to cut a videotape with his analysis of the election. Humphrey did the same. And at 1:30, the Journal wrote, a sweating Politico who had listened to both candidates exclaimed, "Best election I ever saw. Everybody won." Well, not quite. Kennedy won, and that victory helped put him on the road to the Democratic nomination and eventually the White House. I'm David D. Haynes for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. We're back, and a quick update. Politico, the news website, is now calling Indiana for the Republican in the Senate, and that could matter as we go through the night to see which party retains control of the Senate. So we'll keep an eye on that and other races. But for now, I want to go to Craig Gilbert, our Washington bureau chief, who will give us a preview of what to watch for tonight. Okay, hi, this is Dave Haynes. I'm with Craig Gilbert, our Washington bureau reporter. And Craig, you and some other reporters from the USA Today network went out across the country to talk to voters in 8 key counties. What did you learn in doing that?
Well, we were looking at key counties and key states that represented kind of different parts of the electorate. And so in Wisconsin, we looked at Waukesha, which is this big Republican-based county. And so how is Donald Trump doing with Republican voters that he needs to win overwhelmingly? We looked at rural voters. We looked at blue-collar voters. We looked at college-educated voters. Some of these are really key themes to this election in the sense that, for example, the education gap that has emerged between white voters with college degrees and white voters that didn't go to college is much bigger than it has been in the past. It's potentially a key to this election. So we went to these upscale suburbs of Philadelphia where there's like 3 million people outside the city of Philadelphia. And if Trump loses big in those counties because of his deficit with college-educated voters, it's going to be very difficult for him to make up the difference, even in the blue-collar parts of Pennsylvania.
And so in each of these counties, there's really something to watch.
There is.
As the election returns come in. Let's talk about Waukesha County.
Yeah.
You personally reported that, and that's been something you've looked at in some detail in the past. So what can we learn by looking at Waukesha County?
Well, I spent a lot of time talking to Republican voters in Waukesha County, and their reservations about Donald Trump were really close to the surface. I mean, they were widespread. People were a lot of serious conservative-leaning voters who either had concerns about his temperament or about whether he was a true conservative. Now, a lot of those people have come around, and certainly the Republican Party is working overdrive to get them to come around, but there's still a deficit there. He's not where he needs to be, and it's kind of emblematic of this kind of loyalty gap we've seen throughout much of the year, where Hillary Clinton has been getting more universal support from Democratic voters than Trump has been getting from Republican voters. So in a place like Wisconsin, it has almost negated Trump's strength, which is blue-collar voters, rural voters, up north. When you're not performing well in the most important Republican counties in the state, will they turn out for him? Will they deliver the landslides he needs? Is a big question mark.
In those counties around
Waukesha,
Milwaukee.
Washington, Ozaukee, and really the whole Milwaukee media market. That's the one media market in the state's biggest, where he's clearly underperforming where Mitt Romney was 4 years ago.
So on a percentage basis, what percentage of Republicans in those counties did Romney get versus what Trump appears to be getting?
Well, so one way to put it was if you just take a county like Waukesha, a Republican should be winning that by 40 points or 35 points or whatever, and Trump was only winning it for much of the summer by 14 or 15 points. If you look at
that's a big change.
If you look at the Republican, if you take the whole Milwaukee media market, which is 10 counties, it's more Republican. If you take out the city of Milwaukee, the very Democratic part, you get a Republican-leaning southeastern Wisconsin. It's a wash right now. It should be 14 or 15 point lead for Republicans. So it's a real difference.
So let's look at some of these other counties. You mentioned Chester County, Pennsylvania. That's in the Philadelphia suburbs, I believe. So what can you learn by looking at Chester County?
So it's one of these 4 very populous suburbs outside Philadelphia County. It's the most educated county, or one of the most educated counties in Pennsylvania. It's very purple. These are counties, there's kind of these white-collar suburbs, particularly around big cities like Philadelphia and Chicago, that have been trending Democratic. It's part of that education gap we talked about. And because a lot of people live in them, it's a real challenge for Republicans to be losing ground in these places. And obviously, Romney was probably a better fit for these kinds of voters 4 years ago.
These tend to be high education.
Yeah, I mean, Trump has
voters.
his own strengths, but it's not this demographic. And so it is a problem. It's a numbers problem for Trump. And particularly women, white college women, have moved more than almost any other section of the electorate, obviously partly by, the Trump tape, the controversial rhetoric of his, their perception of him. So that demographic is a real problem area for him.
So let's go to an area that should be a Trump strength, and that's Union County, Iowa. Talk about Union County.
So it's a small county, like it's one of these, 13,000 people, a lot of small counties in Iowa. What's interesting about Iowa is that in places like Iowa and Wisconsin, you have a pretty competitive battle for rural whites. And in fact, in a state like Wisconsin, Democrats have to be competitive with rural white voters to win because there's a lot of them, and they have been. Iowa too, but in this election, Iowa has been a strikingly good battleground state for Trump. I mean, it hasn't, usually Iowa and Wisconsin are very close together, but whereas if Wisconsin's a 5-point state for Clinton in the polls, Iowa is a 3 or 4 point state for Trump. And I think a lot of that is because of it's by far the most rural battleground state.
Are these evangelical voters?
Some of them are, but some of them aren't. I mean, in western Iowa, they tend to be more conservative and evangelical. In eastern Iowa, they tend to be more Union Democratic. And I'm sure you would see some differences even among, about Trump. It's not a monolithic vote, but I think this urban-rural gap is widening in our politics, with rural voters becoming more, relatively speaking, more Republican and urban voters more Democratic. And I think that's part of the explanation for why Trump has stayed strong in Iowa and will probably win Iowa, because it's the rural vote dominates there.
So let's look at one more county, and a reminder to our viewers, you can see Craig's story at our website, where he looks at all 8 counties. But let's go to Hillsborough County, Florida. That's Tampa.
Right.
Why is that county important? And talk about Florida and its place on the electoral map Tuesday night.
Yeah, so Florida is the battleground of battlegrounds. It's a 29 electoral votes. It's always close. Trump has no path really without Florida. So we may learn early on election night whether he's got a shot.
What time would that be? 6:30 or so?
When the polls close. But if it's very close in Florida, we're not going to know the result in Florida for some time, even if the polls close early. So relative to other states. So within Florida, you've got this preeminent battleground within the battleground, which is Hillsborough County. It's also the sort of Tampa-St. Pete metropolitan area. And what's interesting about that is that these big metro areas have been moving in a Democratic direction. We talked about the urban vote and the inner suburbs. And most of them, the majority of them are Democratic, but Tampa-St. Pete, the Tampa Bay Metro, is about the most purple metro around, and it's in this very critical state. So it's a huge battleground. It's diverse. It's kind of a microcosm of the country in a lot of ways. Blacks, Latinos, whites. It's urban, rural, suburban. So it's just a key place on the map to watch on election night. It's really kind of a bellwether.
All right. We'll be watching that, and we'll be watching Wisconsin. Craig Gilbert, thanks.
Great to be with you.
I'm back with Craig Gilbert live, and Craig's been doing some reporting here tonight. I'd like to remind you before we talk to Craig, stick with JS Online all night for the latest results and for the best analysis. We've got the best political team in Wisconsin here. Craig, what are you seeing in the early wave of exit polling so far?
Well, we're seeing these big divides that we've seen in the pre-election polling, gender gap, urban-rural gap, but what really it kind of staggers me is the education gap among white voters. I mean, it is much bigger than it was 4 years ago in the Obama-Romney race, and when you look at the difference, college graduates are much more likely to vote for Clinton. Non-college whites are much more likely to vote for Trump. And then if you add gender in, the gulf between white men who didn't go to college and white women who went to college is just staggering. I mean, it's massive. It's more than twice as big as it was in 2012.
Wow. And so explain that a little bit. The gulf between these two groups, the gulf between how they voted, both?
Yes, I mean, the gap between how they're voting and how Democratic white college women are and how Republican white non-college men are. And you also see it in the composition of their support. I mean, those blue-collar white men are, a large majority of Trump's supporters. They're a fraction of Clinton supporters. It's maybe a third of the Clinton vote and close to 2/3 of the Trump vote. This is in the preliminary exit poll findings. So, very different composition in their support. Trump has a lot more evangelicals. He's got more men than women. Clinton has a lot more unmarried women, a lot more non-white voters. So, these are not new, but the education divide in particular is really broadening, and it sort of says something about how our politics are going to kind of devolve along class lines in the future.
Right. And do you see that gap within the Republican Party as well as the
we
gap
have
between
seen
the
it.
candidates?
We have seen it in the polling. I mean, we can't really tell from the exit polls tonight about the internals. We've seen it in the Republican primary race. Yes.
Right. And we should caution that we can't predict anything from this first wave of exit polling. Just talk about that a little bit, how exit polls work.
Yeah, so the exit polls are done by Edison Research for the major networks, and they interview people as they vote or after they vote. Because there's a lot of early voting, they also do a telephone survey of the early voters.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and then what they do is, they start to put these numbers together on election night, and then after the polls close, we can report on what the exit polling says, but over the course of the evening, the numbers get adjusted as the actual returns start coming in. So the real value in the end is not predictive. It's looking at these fault lines, looking at how these different groups are voting, looking at what their attitudes are.
Yeah, absolutely. Understanding more about the electorate as we go along. What else are you seeing so far? What's the mood of the voter look like from the exit polls that you've looked at so far?
A big gulf between Trump voters and Clinton voters attitudinally. I mean, the Trump voters are angrier. I mean, they're almost all angry or dissatisfied with the federal government. Less so the Clinton voters. Huge differences on immigration and trade. The Trump voters are much more likely to say that trade, costs us jobs. They're much more likely to say that immigration has hurt the country rather than helped the country. It's the opposite. With Clinton voters on race, they're much more likely to say that our criminal justice system treats everybody equally. Clinton voters are much more likely to say it treats blacks unfairly. So these really kind of hot button sentiments and issues where there's not a lot of common ground between the coalitions behind these two candidates.
And where are they in terms of naming their top issue? Is that the same? Or
there's some similar. The economy is the number one issue for both Trump voters and Clinton voters, but it's more overwhelmingly the number one issue for Clinton voters. With Trump voters, you get more people citing terrorism and immigration, for example, behind the economy. So there is a difference there, too.
Okay. Craig Gilbert, thank you. Hopefully we'll get you back here before the night ends.
Good.
But you have a lot to do, so we'll see how that goes. Stay tuned. We're about to go to another segment with Charles Franklin, where we will learn more about what he learned and what Craig and I learned from him over the course of the election season from the Marquette University Law School poll. Craig, while we still have you, I was noticing that it looks like Florida, Ohio, maybe Pennsylvania could take a wild count votes. That's not unusual, is it?
No, it
Especially
isn't.
for Florida.
Yeah, and you could end up with a sizable margin in the Electoral College, but still have a long night if big, giant states like Florida are close enough and take a long time to call. And Florida, again, we saw it in 2000.
Yeah.
Massive state, tiny vote difference can have a profound impact on the Electoral College.
Yeah. And the other thing I think we can expect, too, is that from the point of view of popular vote nationwide, Clinton's likely to trail pretty much all night, right? Because the western states won't come in for a while.
Yeah, I mean, in that sense, right.
In the sense of the raw vote.
Right.
So you may be seeing on your screens as you watch the vote totals that, Clinton's behind. That doesn't mean that, she's not
the
doing
running
well.
tally in the national popular vote is probably the last thing you want to focus on at this point. It's really all about, North Carolina, Florida, Pennsylvania, and Ohio, and then with the polls closing, Wisconsin shortly, those states as well.
Yeah. Okay. Craig, thanks so much.
Great.
Now we're going to go to a segment with Charles Franklin. Charles is the director of the Marquette University Law School poll. It's the gold standard of polling in Wisconsin. And we talked to him about what he learned over many months of polling Wisconsin voters.
We're joined now by Charles Franklin, director of the Marquette University Law School poll, and one of the most respected names in polling across the country, to just take a look back with us at this election season and turnout in the election today and what we can expect from all of this. So, Charles, it's been kind of a crazy election, to say the least. But if you had to sum up sort of the mood of the voters in a few words, what would they be at this point?
I think maybe the most important one is not really happy with either of the nominees. When we look at favorability ratings of the candidates, whether here in Wisconsin or especially nationally, both candidates are viewed more unfavorably than any presidential candidate, winner or loser, since we started asking that question in 1976. This means that voters are faced with a bit of a dilemma. Now, many Republicans are happy with Trump. Many Democrats are happy with Clinton. But there are a fair number of voters who are unhappy with both of them. And for them, this has been a very difficult decision about how to choose between two candidates, both of whom are flawed in those voters' eyes.
Yeah, so when you take that into account and how sort of unpopular they are, especially even putting them together, what does that do for turnout, enthusiasm? I mean, some might reluctantly vote because it's their duty, while some stay home. And what are you seeing on the turnout side of things?
We had seen fluctuations in turnout earlier in the year, especially in the summer, which granted is a long ways away from Election Day. Right now, in our final poll, we're seeing turnout expectations a couple of 3 percentage points below where they were at this same time in 2012. So that might suggest either flat turnout, maybe about 3 million, 3.1 million votes here in Wisconsin. That's what we had in 2012. But it might be that or even a shade below, or at least population growth won't make it up much higher. One thing, though, that did show up in this latest round of data is dead even turnout among Democrats and Republicans. So they were, earlier in the year, they weren't always balanced, but in this final poll, we see equal turnout by both, a little bit lower turnout among independents, which is also a typical finding.
All right, let's spin back the clock a little bit on this election and sort of discuss how we got where we are. So if you went back 18 months, say, a lot of discussion was you had Jeb Bush on the Republican side and Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side, and would it be these two political families facing off? Only one made it through. So what was this key in your mind to Hillary Clinton's success to navigate the primaries and get where she is today?
Yeah, or that new guy from Wisconsin, Scott Walker, who was occupying a lot of national attention 18 or 19 months ago in February and March and April of 2015. I think the most striking thing to me is how a very rich field on the Republican side, in the sense that it included governors or former governors, senators or former senators, it was in terms of what your resume showed, a very strong field of Republicans. Each fell away in the face of Donald Trump, someone who has no political resume, no conventional political background, and yet was able to emerge in that Republican primary and ultimately win it. I think that has to stand out as the far more surprising result of this election cycle. With Hillary Clinton, you had a presumptive nominee who did face a surprisingly strong challenge from Bernie Sanders. That shows that presumptive nominees are only presumptive. They often stumble on the way to the nomination. But I don't think you could say that anything that happened on the Democratic side was nearly as surprising as the inability of so many experienced and accomplished Republicans to win their party's nomination in the face of Donald Trump's emerging candidacy.
Yeah, before we turn more detail on the Republicans, let's talk about Hillary Clinton. She is, if she wins the election, going to be the first female president, yet there doesn't seem to be the same sort of historic enthusiasm perhaps around her as there was around Barack Obama as the first African-American president 8 years ago. What did you see in the numbers in terms of women voters, how they're feeling about Hillary Clinton?
Women voters are pretty strongly pro-Clinton by a 50 to 34% margin in our last poll a week before the election. I think that support, that's partly because of supporting a female candidate. But there are lots of Republican and independent women who have voted against female candidates before. Being female alone doesn't ensure that women vote for you. Donald Trump has certainly also turned off a lot of women voters due to his demeanor with women, as well as perhaps some of his issues. But certainly the way he's talked about women has been an issue for female voters. And so we've seen a bigger gender gap and a stronger one within party, where Republican women are voting for Trump 10 points less than Republican men. Normally within party, those two numbers would be very close to each other, maybe no more than a point or two apart.
All right, so you mentioned before, and we were talking about the sort of the battle of the resumes on the Republican side and how Donald Trump came through. Now, some would say, well, look, it was just such a divided and fractured field that gave him his edge, but he certainly tapped into something among the electorate as well. What was the key, do you think, to bringing Donald Trump to the top on the Republican side?
I think the fracture of the vote with initially 17 candidates is certainly a big part of this. Trump came with 20% and then 25% of Republican primary voters strongly committed to him. I think part of that is he built a following based not on political issues, but on his role as a celebrity. And so when he then was being faced with judgment on political matters, his supporters didn't really care about the politics. They'd come to like him for other reasons, and the politics was added on top of that. But having said that, I think there's a lot of issues with the candidates, the conventional candidates, who found it hard to articulate an effective message. And I think you could say most, if not all, of those candidates proved themselves to have some fatal flaws. Jeb Bush couldn't generate enthusiasm. It was unclear what he was running for. Marco Rubio, famously in a debate, proved that he had memorized his answers and would just repeat them robotically. That was a pretty serious flaw. Ted Cruz had a hard time rallying people behind him, though he did that here in Wisconsin at the end of basically his campaign. So if we go down that list, we see that I think every one of the other alternative candidates turned out to have some weaknesses that we really hadn't appreciated before. And Trump, with that strong, stable base of support, was able to stay in the top 2 or 3 of every primary, even though he was still initially getting under 30%. But he built that to the 30s and then eventually into the 40s. And ultimately, I believe he won about 44% of the GOP primary vote.
Yeah, so Donald Trump's view, too, is he's bringing new people to the Republican Party. Do you think those new voters will stick with the party after this, or are they driven more by Donald Trump's personality, and it depends if he's the winner on this evening?
Yeah, I think if they came for Trump, they will have a hard time finding other people in the party that carry the personality and style that Donald Trump brought. That's one of the problems with a non-ideological and really non-partisan campaign that Trump has run, is that the sticking power afterwards may be a little bit more limited. On the other hand, if we look at some of the insurgent forces in the Republican Party, sometimes they're called the burn the house down side of the party, the no compromise, let's shut down the government for our purposes. I think there is this element within the party that's angry with the system as it is, very angry with established Republican politicians. For those folks, I think they might have a natural home with Trump as well as after Trump in that anti-establishment part of the party right now.
Yeah, and finally, let me ask her one of those establishment figures, Paul Ryan, and how he, in your poll, fares in terms of support here in Wisconsin, but does that tend to ebb and flow nationally, or he's got a lot at stake tonight, too, in terms of does he keep the majority, and how big is that majority? I mean, he's safe here, right? He's well-liked in Wisconsin, but how do you see that playing out?
Yeah, at the congressional level, most projections prior to the election suggest that Democrats will pick up some seats, but it would be very surprising for them to pick up enough to actually take control of the House. But ironically, a smaller Republican majority may put Ryan in a harder position. Most of the Republican seats that may flip to Democratic are held by more moderate members of the party who are more likely to be supporters of Ryan now. If they're out of the Congress, that means Ryan has proportionately more of the hardline wing, the Freedom Caucus within the House Republican Party, the folks that pushed John Boehner out of the office that Ryan now holds as Speaker.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Charles, for all the polling and all the hard work throughout this election. On to 2018, I guess, right after tonight, or at least there'll be other stuff to poll in the meantime.
We've got a state budget to get through this spring. We've got something else to do first.
Don't remind us. We've done enough work already, but thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, so it's just past 8 o'clock here in Wisconsin. That means if you are not in line to vote right now, you missed your chance. You might as well then just sit back and watch our show today, as we'll be dealing with more results all evening here in the best political team in the state, given the analysis. So first, let's start with the headlines here at 8 o'clock, or just about 8 o'clock here in Central Time. So the polls have closed in Wisconsin. When you look at the map across the country, Trump has won 7 states so far, Hillary Clinton 5 states. We'll show you those in just a minute. But some of the key states, the ones we're all looking for, Florida, North Carolina, and others have not been called. So let's look at this map right now. Clinton, if you look at the electoral votes right now, she's projected to have 68 so far, Donald Trump 66. And that map, as it was a half hour ago, is kind of what you would expect. It's the very darkest colors that are the states that have been called. The other ones, even from just sometimes very small proportions of precincts reporting, are shaded with who's leading at the time, so that could be pretty volatile. But let's
right now everybody's focusing on Florida because more than 90% of the votes in, and the difference between the two is very small.
Yeah, let's tell people who are here is Dan Bice, our watchdog columnist, who he's ready to go on election night. He's the must-follow tweeter. So if you're following him on all the insights of what's happening, you've been talking to the campaigns here in the state, the parties.
What I try to do is today I've got
us?
like 14 different operatives texting me, so I'm crazy in terms of getting texts, giving me lots of spin and what's going on.
Yeah, so which side is a happier text and which side is sadder text?
What happens is on election night, I line up people on both sides, and the losing side usually starts disappearing until they quit talking altogether. And right now, the Democrats' operatives seem to be the most enthusiastic about what's happening so far. I think there was an exit poll that came out about 7 o'clock that the Democrats circulated among themselves, showing that Hillary Clinton was up about 6 points in Wisconsin, and Russ Feingold was up about 5 in the U.S. Senate race. And you got to remember, with exit polls, they're not predictive. And there have been times in the past in Wisconsin where they've been flat out wrong. But what they serve to do is to keep the insiders all excited or to upset them a little bit.
Yeah, well, if those numbers that you cited they certainly track with the Market Law School poll on the presidential level, not so much on the Senate level, where that one, the most recent poll showed Ron Johnson super close.
Right, down one. Basically within the margin of error. And that's the exciting thing about that race is we saw, in Illinois that the incumbent lost there, and there have been some other places where there have been some upsets. So this race is very important. That's why we had more than a dozen outside groups spending tens of millions of dollars on that race. And what the interesting thing is, the Republicans gave up on Ron Johnson. He ends up doing his own work, cutting some of his own.
Do you think they gave up on him too early? Sort of the establishment out there, these groups that bolster the campaigns?
I think on both sides. You had the outsiders just assuming, and you can find just about any Republican pundit in the state giving the race to Feingold 2 months ago, and Ron Johnson was off the air. And I think I think it's a fair criticism to say that Russ Feingold took his foot off the gas and has eased up and allowed Johnson to get back in it. So I think the Republican outsiders, the Republican outside groups, third-party groups, did make a mistake by pulling out, and I think the Feingold team may have made a mistake by not putting this thing to rest.
Yeah, so what else have you been hearing from folks today? I mean, is one side happier than the other with its get out the vote efforts?
Right, and that's it's funny because both sides focus on the regions where they do the best, and so a lot of focus before this was on Dane County and Milwaukee. And I've been tweeting that people in Milwaukee will be voting. They're still in line now, and they're going to be voting for a while, and that Milwaukee didn't have enough people counting votes. So it might be a long night counting absentee ballots. The numbers in Dane County were good, which is the Democrats had them excited. But it appears that the WOW counties, Waukesha, Ozaukee, and Washington, are going to exceed their numbers from 2012. So in Milwaukee County, it's going to be very similar to 2012. And in those 3 WOW counties, it'll outpace those numbers from 2012.
Is 2012, is that just being used because it's the most recent, or is that a good high water mark for both sides? Or
people in recent years have liked to vote in Wisconsin, so that was a time when the turnout was very good on both sides. So the region I'm focused on and looking at is the Fox Valley, because the Marquette polls showed Trump had a substantial lead, and Ron Johnson was performing very well in that area. So, for Trump to win, he's got to keep those numbers and do very strongly there.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the national perspective of, Donald Trump so far hasn't said if you remember that last debate, will you concede and support the winner if you don't win? There have been a few lawsuits going around in the country already about polling things. What's your experience been with the Trump supporters in terms of, are they going to be ready to give it up if he happens to lose tonight?
The funny thing is, all of these insiders I'm talking to are saying that this has been the most low-key election in Wisconsin that they've seen in a long time.
Election day, you're talking
election
about.
Election day, yeah. That right now, there's usually some excitement, accusations of voter fraud and all of that, and that just hasn't happened. I think one reason for it is the number of people voting early here. I mean, to have 700,000 people vote early in Wisconsin, that's an incredible number of people.
It does change the dynamic even at the polls, where it's hard to tell. You kind of go, well, when I usually vote, I'm this far in line.
Did you vote today or not?
Yeah, I did.
I did.
And you kind of go, well, it seems less, but is that because people have already voted, or is it because people aren't voting?
I went with my wife for the first time. Not for me, a second time, but she hated it because you put your ballot in a tub and it doesn't look very official, and there was no "I voted" sticker. And
those are critical, as we know. All right, any other early predictions for you for the state? If you had to guess right now, who's going to come out on top on those top two
all
races?
I have is that even the Johnson people are saying, they're telling me, even if Johnson loses, win or lose, he ran a really good race, which is usually not
a good sign for
But the people, the Democrats in the state are saying the Senate race will not be a blowout. So I take from all of that it seems that both sides are ready for Feingold to win by a small margin.
All right. Well, we'll go right now to a segment that looks at the U.S. Senate race, which, of course, is the marquee contest after president here in Wisconsin. And this is a segment looking at sort of what to watch for tonight as these results start to come in. We're going to talk a little bit now about the other big race on the ballot here in Wisconsin, the U.S. Senate competition between Ron Johnson, the incumbent, and Democrat Russ Feingold, the challenger. We're joined by Bill Glauber, who covered that race for us this year. Bill, this is a rematch from 6 years ago. That gives it a certain dynamic to it in terms of the candidates know each other, the voters kind of know the candidates. How did that factor into the race?
It got very testy at the end, especially, Ron Johnson felt that Russ Feingold was too negative in the attacks. He thought they were lies. At some point late in the race, he started saying that he didn't like phoniness, referring to Feingold. Feingold tried to stay above the fray, but his campaign was very tough on Ron Johnson. So I think it grew personal and testy, and you could see the body language at the debates. These guys just have maybe had enough of each other.
Well, what was interesting, though, as familiar as they were, the voters in some cases they were undecided, many of them, until the end, right? There was a high number who didn't know Ron Johnson, maybe didn't have strong opinions about the others. How did that come to?
The bad news for Ron Johnson is a third of voters didn't know really enough about him to form an opinion at the beginning of the race. The good news was for Ron Johnson was he was able to reintroduce himself. He did that successfully, and he really closed very strongly in the race in the last 2 months as he showed some personal side, and did rather well towards the end of the race.
All right, and the feature of the most recent polls was Ron Johnson behind by 2 percentage points, the most recently 1 percentage point. Sometimes a candidate that has that kind of closing momentum gets maybe an advantage on election day. Do you see that happening here, or are there other factors at
Or
play?
sometimes the candidate who's coming on strong plateaus and then falls backward a little bit. I mean, it's made the race very interesting. Millions of dollars poured in from outside groups who had stayed on the sideline in the last week. Sorry if you've been watching TV, you have been bombarded by one negative ad after the next. It's tough to say whether Johnson has the momentum to go through to the end. What probably does not help him is that Donald Trump did not appear here in the last weekend. So, not to say that the Republicans gave up on Trump winning the presidential race, but Trump has to be close in the presidential for Ron Johnson to have a chance.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that. What things will you be watching for tonight? Is it ticket splitters, turnout, specific counties? What are the things to watch for in this race?
Obviously, for Russ Feingold, it's Milwaukee, Madison. He has to get massive turnout there and run up the score there. I mean, there's no secret about that. I think that Johnson is looking to run ahead of Trump in the WOW counties, and then. Johnson has really banked on rolling up the score outstate in a swath from Green Bay across and then on north. Feingold has sought to put a firewall in the northwest side of the state. So I'm looking at Green Bay, I'm looking at Madison, looking at Milwaukee, and then seeing if Johnson can find any more voters outstate. I mean, that's sort of been the holy grail for Republicans in terms of trying to turn the state from blue to red in presidential years. It remains to be seen if there are enough folks out there like that to push Johnson over the top.
All right, let's just talk briefly at the end here about the national picture. The Democrats are hoping to regain the Senate if they can. Russ Feingold's certainly a big part of that. So if voters see a strong Johnson performance, is that bad news for Republicans? I mean, good news for Republicans nationally, bad news for Democrats, or how will you be
Very
watching
good
there?
news for Republicans nationally. Ron Johnson, coming into this cycle, was the second most vulnerable incumbent, with Mark Kirk of Illinois being the most vulnerable incumbent. Johnson made it a race, got the outside money in here at the end, but still you would have to figure the odds favor Russ Feingold. If Johnson were to win, then it would appear to me that the Democrats would not take the U.S. Senate.
All right, well, thanks, Bill. We'll have more from you later tonight as the election results start coming in.
Thank you.
So that was Bill Glauber, our reporter who's been covering the U.S. Senate race here in Wisconsin. As everyone knows, who's been following it and seeing all the ads on TV in recent days, that's been a hotly contested race, one of several key races across the country in the U.S. Senate. And of course, here at the Journal Sentinel, we're part of the PolitiFact network, and PolitiFact Wisconsin has fact-checked that race numerous times. So as we get into the evening, we're going to take a quick look at some of the most recent fact checks in that Ron Johnson-Russ Feingold race.
The final days of this campaign featured a wave of attacks from both sides, including in the U.S. Senate race. And we're going to take a look at a few of those late claims now with Tom Kircher, one of our PolitiFact Wisconsin reporters. So, Tom, here's some claims we want to roll through just to remind voters of what they had been hearing and where the candidates and their backers came down.
Right.
So the first claim is from the group Americans United for Change, which said Ron Johnson calls Social Security a Ponzi scheme and wants to privatize the program. And that one was rated half true.
Yeah, Ponzi schemes are illegal, so what Johnson does is call Social Security a legal Ponzi scheme, trying to emphasize that the money comes from today's workers to pay today's retirees. He also has indicated some support for at least some privatization of Social Security, but it's not clear to what extent he wants to do that.
All right, this claim now is from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which says Russ Feingold said that with Obamacare we could keep our doctors and our plans, and it was rated as the lie of the year, and that was rated true.
Russ Feingold did make that statement during his 2010 re-election campaign, and in 2013, PolitiFact National rated that statement as the lie of the year. At that point, it was primarily attributed to President Obama, but others like Feingold made it as well.
All right, and this claim now is from Russ Feingold, who says Ron Johnson is benefiting from several super PACs, and I am not. And that was rated false.
Yeah, that's just not accurate. Both candidates have received money from super PACs, Johnson more so, but Feingold as well.
All right, and now a claim from Ron Johnson, who says, prior to Obamacare here in Wisconsin, 95% of Wisconsinites were covered by insurance. After Obamacare, 95% of Wisconsinites were covered by insurance. It hasn't had an impact, and that was rated false.
Yeah, that suggests there's been no impact on people who were uninsured before, but that's just not the case. Depending on the survey, you look at least 1 or 2 percentage points of improvement in terms of the number of Wisconsinites who have insurance since Obamacare as compared to before.
Right, and in that case, Ron Johnson was using an outdated number. That sort of measuring stick took in the transitional year before Obamacare was fully
That's
implemented.
Right. Yep.
Now a claim from Russ Feingold, who says Donald Trump and Ron Johnson oppose a women's right to choose, and Johnson voted against the Violence Against Women Act, and that was rated mostly true.
Mostly true because Trump and Johnson are anti-abortion. When it comes to the Violence Against Women Act, Johnson did vote against that particular bill, but it wasn't as though he was against domestic violence protections. He voted for some alternatives that he thought were better.
All right, and finally, one from the Wisconsin Republican Party that says Russ Feingold formed his own political group to pay himself and his staff millions, and that was rated half true.
This is a reference to Progressives United, the group that Feingold formed after he lost re-election in 2010. There was about $2 million spent. He collected some of that, also salaries to his staff members. Whether that was the intent in forming that group, no evidence of that specifically.
All right, well, that's our discussion for this election. Another election in the books for PolitiFact Wisconsin. You can follow all of our work after this election and beyond at politifact.com/Wisconsin. All right, so that amounts to what is kind of a preview of sorts for what to expect tonight in the U.S. Senate race, which has been so hotly contested. Reminder to folks who are watching us on Facebook and on the JS Online website, if you've got questions and comments, send them in on Facebook. We've got all sorts of tweets flowing in on our website, giving you the most up-to-the-minute information and all sorts of charts and maps and things, everything you could want to know to follow the elections. You don't have to turn on those broadcasts, folks, on TV. We've got the information right here for you. But let's right now show you the current electoral map from USA Today. And right now, it's, again, so far sort of playing out as expected. There's some of the surprises, or the key states we're looking for are Florida and North Carolina. Those right now are shaded as leaning toward Trump in the returns, but those are exceedingly close contests. And the big states, New York has been called for Hillary Clinton. That's a lot of electoral votes. Illinois, a lot of the same map from the past. So in the next few hours, some of the paths to victory will become clearer or less clear for the opportunities for each side. A couple things that came in over the last few minutes in Illinois. That U.S. Senate race has been called for Tammy Duckworth, so that's a pickup for the Democrats in that race. It's a significant thing, and you can see in that case it did track with the presidential returns in that state. And there are exit polls out now in Wisconsin. These are not the Democratic ones that Dan Bice referenced. These are the official ones. And in the U.S. Senate race, they show Russ Feingold at 51 to 47%. And in the presidential race, Hillary Clinton 48 to 44%. So a 4-point margin on both races. The difference being that Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump is lower because of the third-party candidates in that race. And again, the requisite reminder, these are not predictive, and sometimes they can be wrong, but this gives some indication of what people were doing at the polls today. So Mary, you're a veteran. Mary Spicuzza, for those who don't know Mary from our Thursday shows, she's joined us now. You're a veteran observer of politics in the state of Wisconsin. What, if you're, say, in the Hillary Clinton campaign right now, what are you watching for? Because these results are now starting to come in, the official final results.
I think if she is ahead by 4 points, that would explain why we haven't seen her in a while. Obviously, Donald Trump had been making repeat visits to the state. We really haven't seen Hillary, in months and months, since maybe April.
Since
Bernie's been back, stumping
right,
for her. Biden, surrogates, Chelsea Clinton. But I think we all had a sense that if she was truly nervous about Wisconsin, we would have seen her, or maybe President Obama or Michelle Obama, somebody really high profile making a visit. We did not see any of them in the days or weeks leading up to the election. So it seemed to be, the polls seemed to be indicating that she was in the lead.
Yeah, well, I mean, in contrast, in the final weeks, she herself spent a lot more time in Michigan, which is another upper Midwestern state that has a long history of going Democratic, similar demographics.
There were some polls there that were showing the race really tightening, and I think it drew some concern. She also didn't win the primary there, and I think there had been a poll that showed Donald Trump had really gained on her, so that would explain that. I think it was a kind of a last-minute trip to Detroit and a rally there. You know, she was in Cleveland, but really we haven't seen much activity.
Some of those states are significant because Donald Trump needs to break through somewhere. I was seeing one analysis earlier that, in theory, Hillary Clinton could lose Florida and North Carolina and a host of other states and Arizona and still win if Trump can't break through in states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania.
And again, not even when Paul Ryan was on the ticket 4 years ago as the vice presidential hopeful, Republicans still couldn't win Wisconsin. Trump has struggled here with popularity. He didn't win our primary. He really hasn't been popular in crucial Waukesha County and the WOW counties. So I think a combination of, the polls showing she's ahead and Trump struggling in Wisconsin really since the beginning of the race.
Right, yeah, let's talk a little bit about Hillary Clinton and the historic nature of tonight. I mean, potentially in a few hours you'll have elected the first female president of the United States. And if not, you have a lot of disappointed people who are really thinking that's going to happen. Among the Clinton supporters, you can see that enthusiasm build in recent days.
Right.
You've been talking to a lot of those supporters and to understand that angle. What have you been hearing from people?
You know, it's interesting. You started seeing a lot of people in pantsuits, women wearing suffragette white to show solidarity with Clinton and with the suffragists who, in 1920 got the right to vote, but we haven't seen a woman really break the highest glass ceiling yet. Obviously, Clinton tried 8 years ago, was not successful. So I think that there is a lot of hope that this will be the year that a woman is elected president. People were going to Susan B. Anthony's grave and leaving "I voted" stickers or flowers or mementos in New York. And I think that there was actually something near the Art Museum here with part of the Pantsuit Nation, which has, last time I looked, it was like almost 3 million followers in this kind of secret Hillary Clinton.
It's not so secret if you
not
have 3
very
million
secret.
followers.
Yeah, it was secret, and now not really very, maybe secret in quotes. But yeah, it's and it's interesting because it's a lot of women sharing stories about Hillary, sharing stories about what this means for, what this would mean for a woman to be elected president if she is successful. So yeah, I think we will see a lot of very sad people in pantsuits if she does not win tonight.
Yeah, but you didn't, I mean, one thing that was striking to me, especially compared to 8 years ago with Barack Obama becoming the first African-American president and that prospect, is there didn't seem to be as much sort of discussion of that historic nature of it throughout the campaign. Now in the home stretch, you're seeing a little bit more of it. People are sort of saying, well, I can't believe I got to go vote for a woman for president in my Democratic Party if they're a Democrat. But why do you think that is? What's the different dynamic going on here that didn't color the race in the same way things did with Barack Obama?
I think obviously the primary was very contestuous both times between Hillary and Clinton or Hillary and Bernie. I do think that it took a long time for Bernie supporters who really had their heart set on Bernie being the nominee to come around to Clinton. Some are still writing in his name or voting for another party. But I think that there was just a lot of high hopes for Bernie, and he just inspired such a following, especially among millennials, that it has taken a while for people to really get excited about Clinton if they were that excited about Bernie. And I think also there is a little bit more Clinton baggage than Barack Obama had. The Clintons have been in the public eye for a long time.
Someone probably said there's like a baggage car, right? I mean, that's part of it.
Sure.
She's not a well-liked candidate, nor is Donald Trump, of course.
Right. Neither have been, historically, I think they're described as historically unpopular in terms of people trusting them. That said, I think there are women supporters who feel like she's been attacked maybe more harshly because she is a woman, and criticisms of her being either cold or emotional on one or the other, or self-serving. And I think they will point out, well, what politician isn't self-serving? Is Scott Walker self-serving? Is Paul Ryan self-serving? Is Donald Trump self-serving? And why is she being criticized for being self-serving? Is she supposed to be this nurturing mother to us all? So I think that people feel like maybe some of the criticism is gender-focused. But certainly, the scandals, the baggage, the previous Clinton presidency, I think that she's just been in the public eye for a long time. And it's almost like people know her really well, but then don't know her that well. So
yeah, I mean, she seemed to constantly be wanting to reintroduce herself to voters.
Yeah, and even the Bill Clinton speech about her on election night, or on not on election night, convention. Yeah. It was interesting because as he was talking about her, I was thinking like, gosh, I thought I knew her pretty well, and that's actually a lot of things that I didn't know about her.
Right. Yeah. I mean, one of the different dynamics too, of course, is so if you're an African American who's breaking that barrier 8 years ago, the polls and everything suggest that most African Americans are with the Democrats, right? So if you're a woman, you're not necessarily with the Democrats. It's a much different split. So people would say, well, sure, I want a woman to be president. I just want it to be Carly Fiorina or somebody different.
Yeah, and obviously not all women are going to vote for Hillary Clinton, and certainly not all Republican women, and probably many Republican women are not. That said, I think Donald Trump has struggled to win support among Republican women, among moderate Republican women, and we've seen poll after poll showing him far ahead with Republican men than compared to Republican women. The Marquette poll was showing just a tremendous gender gap for him, and I don't think his comments about women, the Access Hollywood tape, the allegations of groping, none of that has probably really helped him with either Republican or
one
independents.
Piece of Trump news we should share is that he's won the state of Texas again. That's not a big surprise, although a few weeks ago Hillary Clinton was looking before the FBI revelations came out that was making inroads there. So that's another, sort of playing to form so far in those states. But before we move on and shift with some more results at the end of at 8:30 here, you cover City Hall. What have you been hearing about turnout here in the city and throughout the state?
So it sounds like turnout has been high. There have been some troubles. There was the ballot shortage in Waukesha County. I had heard rumors that there was trouble counting ballots at City Hall, although I heard back from Neil Albrecht, who runs the elections for the city, and he said that they've really just haven't had problems as much as just incredibly high turnout, and so it's going to take them a while to count all of those absentee ballots. You have to stop counting absentee ballots when people are feeding their own.
It's not like early voting in some states where those get counted right away and those get recorded at the polling location at the end of the night.
And he did say that it will probably be done by, sooner than it was 4 years ago, where I guess they finished at about 2:30 in the morning. So I wouldn't say it's a problem. It's just they're just busy. So
all right.
I guess that's not a bad thing. It means people are voting, right?
It means people are voting. That's what we want. And in fact, speaking of people voting, we're going to go to a tape right now of some of the people and what they had to say today as they went to the polls.
So tell me what your thoughts were going into the voting booth today.
My thoughts was that I'm going to make my vote count for the right person that cares about us and the United States.
What kind of message do you want to send out to folks now about voting?
If you care about where you live, come and vote. If you really, really want the United States to be what it's supposed to be, vote.
I just went in and let the Holy Spirit lead me as who I should check off.
Did you know before you came here who you were going to vote for?
Not really. I was undecided, but the Lord took care of that.
Good.
Yeah.
And how was the experience itself, the mechanics of voting?
Everything was good. Everything went really smooth. I didn't have to wait or anything. Went right in, voting came right out.
My name is Lorenzo. I came and voted today. This is my first time voting. Pretty nice experience. It was quick and easy. I'm glad I voted today, got my input on who I want to be president.
Were you pleased with the candidates that you had to choose from today?
No, not really. But got to choose one. Somebody has to win.
What were your thoughts going in the polling booth today?
Oh, excellent. I mean, I went in there with an open mind, and I came out with the right vote, I believe, for myself, and I hope everybody else have the same opinion.
You think it's important to vote?
Oh yeah, very, very much. I mean, that's where we get our people in office and things that we need to get done in life.
What are your thoughts today as you're going in to vote?
Looking for a change. Big change. Big change. Insurance. Healthcare. Yes. Disability. Education. You know, just world in general.
Yeah.
Change in the world.
Why is it important to vote in your view?
It's your right. Your right, and to voice your opinion. Your opinion. If you don't vote, you have no opinion.
Hi, I'm David Haynes. I'm back again, and I'm here with Bill Glauber, a reporter for the Journal Sentinel, who is covering the U.S. Senate race. Very important race, as they all are this year, between Russ Feingold, the Democrat, and Ron Johnson, Republican. Before we talk to Bill, though, let's look at the headlines. In Illinois, a pickup for the Democrats. Tammy Duckworth beat the incumbent Republican there, Mark Kirk. And so that sort of makes up for the one they thought they might win in Indiana, where Evan Bayh, the former senator, lost to the Republican. Elsewhere, Florida, Ohio, and North Carolina still are on the knife's edge, very close. And it might be a while before we have results there. I mentioned Indiana. Todd Young, the Republican, won there. Evan Bayh got himself into some trouble because it appeared to at least some Hoosiers that he no longer lived in the state. At least that was the allegation. In Wisconsin, we see early leads for Trump and Johnson, but that's based on very early returns, and so it's difficult to draw any real conclusions from that. So, Bill, let's talk about the Senate race. What are you seeing so far? What are you hearing?
I'm hearing it's close. Lots of credit goes to the Johnson side for making it close at the end. They really closed with a rush.
You bet. I mean, it looked to me like Feingold might have this wrapped up 2 or 3 weeks ago, and Ron Johnson came storming back.
He came storming.
What happened there? How do you do that?
Well, a couple of things happened. You got to go back to August. Johnson was off the air. Feingold was on the air. Johnson stayed in the race. September comes around. He gets his ads back on air, and they're positive ads. He gets a nice fuzzy image with the voters who really didn't know much about him. 1 in 3 didn't at the start of this race, which is shocking
for a senator.
And he just kept coming on, and you know he
had a pretty good race in the end.
He made it a good race. He got a lot of outside money, a lot of third-party conservative money came in here and poured right down on Russ Feingold's head. So Feingold's negatives went up a little bit. Johnson's positives went up a little bit, and then we have a horse race. Now, amazingly, both men end up right side up, which I thought was impossible to happen. That is, the public liked both guys more than they hated them, and given this political environment, that's sort of amazing.
That's shocking. That may not happen anywhere else in the country.
It may not. I mean, and you know, and
that's Wisconsin nice.
It
right
is,
there for you.
And Feingold ran a good campaign. He stayed on message. He tried to, present himself as a more populist figure, listening to voters, and, it resonated for a while, but then I think they probably stalled a little bit. Then, Johnson came up, and whether he has enough to go through, I mean, that's questionable at this point.
We're going to see.
We're going to see. Yeah. I mean, you would have to still say that Feingold today was favored to win.
Right.
The likelihood, is that he will win, but we do not know. So maybe we'll get an upset.
So we well could. So when Johnson made this run, was it also in part because Feingold wasn't on the air to the same extent he was?
No, Feingold was on the air, but what happened is you had, especially towards the end, you had this gusher of conservative money come in. Both sides were out of this race, meaning both the Democratic and Republican senatorial committees, they had no money in this race in September. Ron Johnson was left for dead on the side of the road, basically, in political terms, and he pulled himself back in this race on his own, with his own team, and then people came in at the end. But, hats off to Johnson for really making this thing a race. Right. And also, Feingold did what he was supposed to do also, and it's a very closely fought state. Right. So, I mean, Feingold never won by big margins here. So that we may be reverting to that kind of a race.
Right. So what did you hear from voters as you talked to people covering the campaign that in the context of the Senate race that they cared about most? What kind of issues really were hitting home for voters?
They were pocketbook issues.
Okay.
You know, Johnson, you know, his supporters liked what he was saying. That is, Russ Feingold wants more government. I want you to have more money in your pocket. For the Feingold side, he kept hitting on college affordability, on a $15 an hour minimum wage, on making the economy work for everybody. That was his message. And I think both those messages resonated with the two parts of this Wisconsin electorate. We are a purple state, but a divided state. And those messages were tuned right down to their bases. And then, you know, you have this small independent slice. Johnson was starting to do better with them towards the end of the campaign as people got to know him. Again, the bad news for Ron Johnson at the beginning of this race was 1 in 3 voters had no idea who he was. Could not tell you an opinion about him. The good news for Ron Johnson, he got to make himself a new identity here, and that resonated with voters, and that brought him back into the race.
And if he wins, well, he says he's not going to run for a third term, even if he wins. I was going to say, if he wins, presumably the identity issue wouldn't be a problem the next time.
No, the identity issue wouldn't be a problem the next time around. But he says this is it, his second time, and I think, you know, he means it. I do think he means it. And you know what was interesting? We had him here at the editorial board, which towards the closing part of the campaign, which I think was actually a turning point, where, you know, we asked him bluntly what he thought of Russ Feingold. You know, it didn't seem he liked him, and he just said, "I don't like phoniness."
Yeah,
and from that point on, he was like, everything sort of let go, and he constantly said that Feingold was lying about his record. He called him a phony. I'm not saying this is accurate, but this was a guy who was just relieved. I'm winging it, and this is who I am. Take me or not.
And he went for it. So we have some video that talks about what you just talked about. We have a couple of video clips. We're going to go to Ron Johnson's clip, the one that you just mentioned first, and then we have one from Senator Feingold as well. This is the editorial board meetings that we had with them in October.
I don't respect phoniness. Go back to that quote. The last 6 years gave him a chance to feel like a guy from Wisconsin leading a life that's similar to other people. Is that really a guy who's traveled around the state and really been part of Wisconsin? No, that's a comment from a Washington elitist, somebody who went to Harvard and Oxford, who has bamboozled the folks here in Wisconsin that he's this little, you know, independent little maverick guy that has their best interests at heart.
That seems a little more personal than I remember you talking about.
Well, he's been lying about me for the last 6 months, and I don't particularly appreciate it.
And now let's go to a video clip from Russ Feingold again during an editorial board meeting with the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel in early October.
I think the way to look at it is more 2 people applying for a job and who gets chosen. This job ends after 6 years. You got to apply for a new term. Your job's over. And so I think it's much more civil to think of it in those terms instead of harsh terms. And so what I would like to say is the people of the state should decide what kind of representation would they prefer. And they've now had a chance. It's a rare situation where they've actually had a chance to see 2 different people both be in the United States Senate. What would you rather have? Would you rather have somebody who makes it a critical part of his work to visit all the counties and listen to people first and really gather information about what's going on?
Tell us again why you need to be elected. I'm interested in you telling people why you think he should not have a second term.
Well, I'm about to contrast that with the fact that Senator Johnson has refused on a regular basis to get around the state, to get to know the state. You know, I grew up in the state. He does not know the state as well. He has not made it a regular practice to get around to the counties. He is frankly not telling the truth when he said he's gotten around all these years. The comment I've heard the most, in direct answer to your question, is we've never seen the guy. That's what I hear all the time. The truth is he hasn't gotten around the state. He ran around like crazy last summer because I was starting to point out that I really do go around and listen to people. And he went to all 72 counties and visited population posts. He actually has a picture of himself at the population posts. And then he said that one of his supporters on Facebook said, well, pigeons do that. Well, that just shows you the difference, Dan. The difference is he doesn't get the part that you listen first.
Now I'm back with James Causey, who's a columnist for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. James, thanks for being with us tonight.
Thank you
coming in on your night off.
Oh, yeah.
And Christian Schneider, another columnist for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. Both report to the editorial board. So we're going to talk first about the national race, about where it appears to be at right now. And if you look at the map, it appears to be sort of breaking. There's no super big surprises right now, right, Chris? What are you seeing?
I'm certainly surprised at how close. I guess we always knew Florida was going to be pretty close, and Ohio and North Carolina. It looks like Virginia's a lot closer than I think people expected. Mm-hmm. Being from Virginia originally, it's usually the case there where you have all the rural counties come in, and then you have that huge Washington, D.C. suburb kind of come in.
Northern Virginia.
Right at the end there. So I think that's still going to be pretty tight, but tighter than people thought.
That was expected to be a good state for Clinton.
Yes, it was.
She wasn't supposed to struggle there.
Right. And the last thing I saw before we started this was there's a debate back and forth about how close Trump's going to be in Michigan. Like the New York Times website is saying Trump could actually still win it. The Detroit Free Press has already called it for Clinton. So I think that's going to be closer than people thought. So I think there are going to be some surprises here tonight.
So, James, a lot of this has to do with African-American turnout in some of the metropolitan areas. Certainly in Michigan, in the Detroit area, in Wisconsin, it's Milwaukee, to a certain extent, Dane County.
Yes.
What have you been hearing as you talk to folks over the last few weeks about African-American turnout in the Wisconsin market?
Well, there's been a big social media push to get African-Americans out to vote. And, Hillary Clinton has relied on the hip-hop community to actually help her. Jay-Z and Beyonce and people like that have been making
star power.
Big pushes to back her. They backed President Obama in his 2 campaigns. So there's been this real big push. And I saw a lot of that today when I went to vote. I voted real early. I was like at the poll around 7:45, and I was number 125 at my polling place. And normally that would be like in the 80s or so. So and it was a long line. And it was packed full of African Americans willing to vote and have their vote count.
So it's going to be interesting to see how that turns out because, and to both of you here, one of the concerns was that after the incredible surge of energy for people of color, for President Obama, could Clinton hang on to that constituency? What do you think?
I think she hung on to it to a point. I don't think she had the same enthusiasm that he had.
Yeah.
I mean, even in his second term, I don't even think he had the same momentum that he had in the first.
Fair enough.
So when it comes down to Hillary, she's a woman, and it took a lot of people to come around because a lot of people are still supporting Bernie. So
in the African American community, that's right. We talked about this earlier in the cycle.
Right.
Yes.
So
very interesting.
So with that support for Bernie, it was that when she took over, a lot of people were so upset over that. So that coming around took some time, and a lot of people still didn't come around fully to it. But now I think a lot of African Americans and people in the minority community look at it it's the best of 2 evils. I hate to find a better word, but they're looking at it like they're not really satisfied with either candidate, but they figured let's go with Hillary and back her up because we think she could continue to support.
But the flip side of that too is that maybe they're not enamored with Hillary, but look who the other option is.
Exactly.
And so Donald Trump tends to be a pretty unifying force on the left. So maybe Hillary wasn't all that they had hoped for, but when you look at what was on the other side, I think that'll probably drive a lot out.
Yeah. So, Chris, you're a columnist. You're allowed to have an opinion, and you always do seem to have opinions. Are you preparing for the possibility that Donald Trump could be our next president?
I think I was prepared for that a long time.
It would be a big surprise.
And I asked that. I should preface it by saying I asked that because you were sort of a charter member of the Never Trump movement.
Yes, I've never technically, identified as Never Trump or whatever.
You don't have a card?
No, I don't have. Yeah, it's not my avatar on Twitter or whatever. But I mean, this would be the biggest surprise of any of our lifetimes, I think, if this were to happen. But yeah, so I mean, the way the map looks now, I think he's doing better in places than some people thought. But there are still some areas that are going to come in, and I don't know. He's still, Florida, Ohio, North Carolina. He's still got to kind of pull off that trifecta. If for some reason he were to lose, like North Carolina, he'd have to win a Michigan or Wisconsin or someplace like that. So, I still think it's kind of a long shot, but crazier things.
He's got a pretty narrow
I would say
path.
Crazier things have happened, but I don't know if a crazier thing has happened. This could be the new standard.
Certainly not my lifetime.
This has been a one-of-a-kind type of election, to say the least. And when you think about it, when you think about how all the people he's assaulted along the way, and how close that this race appears to be in some states, it's still kind of shocking. So that's the kind of thing that bothers a lot of people like me. And a lot of people that I know, when you see how close, like a state like Florida.
So you wouldn't. You're like, after all we've been through, how can it be? Why should it be that close?
Yeah, I mean, even Hillary asked that question. How can it even be close?
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, a lot of people have real concerns about Hillary Clinton. I mean, we expressed them, to be fair, in an editorial on Sunday.
Yeah. Well, the one thing that I would like to know, though, after all this is said and done, the unifying that needs to take place in this country, and that's one thing that Hillary will have to do if she wins, and if Trump wins, he would have to do the same thing. But that unifying that needs to take place, and that'll be interesting to see how that unfolds over the next couple of months.
Well, let's talk about that. You've written about Paul Ryan's task in the past. I think you're planning to actually write about that this week. Let's assume for a minute, and we don't know anything yet, let's assume for a minute that the Republicans hold the House and Hillary Clinton is president. What does Paul Ryan have to do? And what are the problems he faces in his own caucus?
Yeah, I mean, he's certainly got a problem in his own caucus. He even saw that when he got the speakership in the first place. But he was literally the only person in Congress that could kind of pull everything together. I mean, I don't think they'd be where they are right now without him. So at least he has that kind of a chip to play. It's like, look, where would we be, in the era of Trump without me kind of holding everything together? Sadly, I think holding everything together meant endorsing Trump, which I would have recommended he not do, and I was critical of him for doing. But yeah, I mean, I really don't know how he pulls the party together. I mean, it seems like there's a large chunk that almost has to be purged from the party in order for it to be kind of a national party again. And I do think, in terms of bringing everybody together, I do think Hillary Clinton has some work to do on that regard. I agree with you. Let's see what happens if she takes over, and what kind of cabinet she has, how she's willing to work with Congress. I think that could go a long way. I mean, when Bill Clinton, his legacy is something other than kind of how he governed, but he was more of a centrist. He had triangulation. He had, he was able to work with Republicans on a lot of things. So, maybe we can hold out hope that she learned something from that, and that'll be her legacy.
So that hasn't been how she's run this year, though, in part because Bernie Sanders has pushed her left. James, what's your take on the real Hillary? What do you think she is, and what do you think she has to do if she does win to pull the country together?
Let me go back to. Well, let me just say this: the real Hillary Clinton. I don't think a lot of us really know. I mean, that's
good for us. That's good for the right, because hey, maybe she'll be better than we think.
Yeah, but a lot of us don't know the real Hillary Clinton. What we think we know is that she's had some issues with being fair, and had some issues with emails, and she's had some issues with Benghazi. She's had some serious character flaws that a lot of people have said, wait a second, is she capable to run this country? So she has to surround herself around a lot of good people. She has to try to work across the aisles with those who want to work with her. I think it's a waste of time to try to work with people who you just absolutely know you can't work with. And that's going to take some time. I don't even know if that could be accomplished over the next 4 years. So, but for this country to move forward and for us to get to a place where we could actually have some kind of peace of mind and where we can have job growth and so we could move this country to the next phase, it's going to take a whole lot of work. And I don't know if that could be done in 4 years.
Well, let's talk about if Donald Trump wins. Chris, I know that's something you don't want to think about, but how does that affect Paul Ryan's calculus? Does that make it harder or easier? Yeah, normally it would make it easier. He's a member of your own party.
No,
in this case, I don't know.
I think so, yeah, I think it makes it very much harder because now, instead of being the face of the party and being able to control the message, now Donald Trump becomes the face of the party. Exactly. And Lord knows what he's going to say at any given time. And then at that point, Ryan is going to, we've seen him play Hamlet for the last, 6 months. Now it goes on for 4 years where he has to say, yeah, I support him, but I don't really support him in this instance, and going back and forth. And so you're going to see this for the next 4 years, and everything that Donald Trump does, not just Paul Ryan, but every Republican is going to be held accountable for. Scott Walker is going to be held accountable for it. He's going to stain the entire party every time he does some of these things. And there may be still some stuff out there that we don't know about that's going to come out.
And don't you think Donald Trump will force Paul Ryan not to be wishy-washy? He will force him to make a stand. You can't. He won't allow him to say, well, I don't support you on this. He will not allow that to happen, and that's where the conflict will come in.
That it's possible, and then you also have to think about the U.S. Senate now too, exactly. Because you got the filibuster depending on where where they are at the end of tonight. So I think you're going to have 5 or 6, 7 votes somewhere in there that could actually be running the country and stopping what Donald Trump wants to do. So conservatives will be happy about Supreme Court justices. Mm-hmm. That's kind of like the one best argument that Donald Trump had for conservatives, but I haven't seen any evidence that Donald Trump really knows what a good Supreme Court justice is. At some point, he said one of the Supreme Court justices signed this bill to do this. It's like, no, that's not really what Supreme Court justices do.
That's actually not what they do. He did provide a list of candidates, though, that conservatives seem to be okay with. Hey, with that segue, let's move on to the U.S. Senate race in Wisconsin. Sure. We don't have enough returns in yet to know how it's going to go. But let me start with you first, Chris, okay. on Ron Johnson. Talk about the race he ran.
I think he ran the best race that he could. I think he ran a stellar race, actually. I think he was behind, as all Republicans are in Wisconsin in a presidential year. It's been 36 years since a Republican has won a Senate seat in a presidential year in Wisconsin. And so I think he was already behind. I think Trump probably dragged him further back. And now, if the polls are to be believed, then he's got this thing within a whisker. I think the fact that just a few months ago we were talking about, well, voters don't even know who Ron Johnson is. I mean, probably a third of the people in Wisconsin still probably thought Russ Feingold was their U.S. senator, and so that was bad for Ron Johnson in one respect. But in the other respect, it left this huge hole for him to fill, to let people know who he was. It was like a blank slate that he could then, provide the paint. And I think he did that. I think he did a lot of good ads, positive ads about the job creation program that he had in Milwaukee. A lot of hokey stuff with his kids and things like that, and kind of changed the public perception. What little public perception of him there was, I think he changed it more positive. And so I think that it was a masterstroke, and he's close.
Let's talk about Russ Feingold and just your thoughts on the Senate race at this point.
I have to agree with my colleague here. I think Ron Johnson ran a great campaign, almost better than his first campaign. He allowed us to understand who he is, and he did a really good job and made this race, which will probably be tighter than a lot of people expected, when he was expected to get routed in the very beginning. As far as Feingold is concerned, this is going to be interesting. If Feingold loses, where does he go from here? I think it's over for him as far as politics
it may well
are concerned.
Be. Yeah.
I think he ran a good race. I think it turned nasty I wish it wouldn't have turned as nasty as it did. I think these two guys right now don't like each other. And honestly,
it's pretty clear from the clips we played.
Yeah.
There's no love lost there.
Right. And I wish the race would have been a cleaner race and not turn so nasty. I thought the debates, they both indicated how different they were and what they plan on doing. And I think Feingold is Feingold. He is who he is. He's a guy who came to us and held up his hand and said, "This is Green Bay," before. So he is who we thought he was.
So, Chris, just one clarification. You talked about how a Republican they struggle during presidential years, and that's because the electorate is different.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. More Democrats tend to vote in presidential years.
Right, and that's what happened in 2010 because it wasn't a presidential year, and Ron Johnson was kind of swept in on this anti-Obamacare
Governor
wave.
Walker came in.
Right, that's when Walker came in. That's when you had a huge Republican gains in that year.
Yeah.
This year, and then in 2012, you had the most popular, person in Wisconsin history, Tommy Thompson, lose to Tammy Baldwin.
Right.
Because you have an entirely different set of voters, and I think that's probably what's going to happen this time. And if Feingold were just somehow to lose this, I think he's going to win. If he were to lose it, it would be catastrophic because he had every advantage possible. And so, all the credit to Ron Johnson if he wins. Johnson's up early. This always happens. The Republicans are probably going to be up early, and then you get Dane County coming through. So it's going to be late, I think.
All right. Well, we're going to have you back in the next half hour or hour. James Causey, columnist. Christian Schneider, columnist for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. And now we're going to go to a look at the 8th District congressional race between Tom Nelson and Mike Gallagher. Mike Gallagher's the Republican, Tom Nelson, the Outagamie County executive, the Democrat. Let's take a look at that.
We're joined here by Jason Stein from our Madison Bureau to talk about the 8th Congressional District, which is the most competitive of the seats in the Wisconsin delegation and the only open seat here this election cycle, where Reed Ribble is retiring after several terms in Congress. So, Jason, tell us a little bit about this race. Who are the key players, and what are the dynamics that we'll be watching for tonight?
Right. So you have the Republican Mike Gallagher, a former Marine and military intelligence specialist who did a stint as an aide in the U.S. Senate and also as an advisor to Governor Scott Walker's short-lived presidential campaign. Gallagher is running against Democrat and Winnebago County Executive Tom Nelson, who previously served as the majority leader in the Wisconsin Assembly. So that is a race that it's been watched nationwide, significant amount of spending and interest in that race. It was appearing, relatively tight a week or two ago as Hillary Clinton surged and Democrats started to hope that they could start to make an impact on some of those races. But I think the reality here is you have to give the edge to Gallagher, given that Donald Trump has performed pretty strongly in the Green Bay area. And as well, you just look at congressionally where the competitive races are. They're typically not in the upper Midwest. It's in the southwest part of the country that Democrats seem to have the best chance of picking up seats.
Yeah. Now, this district over time has gone back and forth between the Democrats and Republicans pretty consistently. Has that changed with the redistricting here in Wisconsin? I mean, how much of an edge do you think that gives to the Republican side of the equation tonight?
Right. So it's always been one of the state's more competitive seats, maybe historically slight edge to the Republicans in the seat, and certainly after the redistricting legislation that took effect in 2011 got a bit more difficult for Democrats. There's still certainly a chance that Tom Nelson might eke out a win in that district. But if that does happen, that would certainly be a very negative sign for Republicans because it would suggest that they're underperforming. And, another way of saying that is to say that Mike Gallagher is expected to win.
All right. And is there anything else to look for on the various congressional races in terms of just how well a candidate performs, or are those all expected to be pretty bland races tonight?
Well, I guess one thing to watch would be to see how Sean Duffy up in northern Wisconsin does in his reelection race. Donald Trump has appeared to be doing very well in rural parts of Wisconsin, like that district. If for some reason there was that race turned out to be a little bit closer, that would be a sign that Trump is not performing as well. By the same token, we can look to western Wisconsin, where Ron Kine would be expected to win re-election easily. If his race was a little bit closer, that might be a sign that Donald Trump is really doing well in those western rural counties, and that it might be a little better night for Republicans.
All right. Thanks for those things to watch for, Jason, and we'll be checking in more later on this evening. All right, so it's just after 9 o'clock now here in Wisconsin, and some of the results are starting to come in. We'll show some of those numbers in just a minute, and then we'll talk some more with Dan Bice and what he's hearing about what's happening out on the trail. So let's take a look at the headlines first of all. Not a surprise, but the AP has called Paul Ryan as the victor in his district, where he didn't have to campaign very hard, and the word was that was sort of his easiest task in the past few months, was managing re-election.
That's like the worst news for Donald Trump tonight.
Yeah, that he's. Yeah. Well, we have Ron Johnson at a 9-point lead with 25% of the vote in. Trump has a 5-point lead with 24% in, and Mike Gallagher in the 8th Congressional District is taking an early lead. So let's show you, too, some of those specific numbers. Here's the 8th Congressional District race, which is in the Green Bay area. Often it's flipped hands. This is Reed Ribble's former seat, who's Reed Ribble stepping down. And then you see those numbers with a pretty substantial lead of, at least early in the process, from Mike Gallagher, the Republican. On the presidential side of things, again, this is very early, so it's hard to read much into it because we don't know exactly where those results are coming from. But Donald Trump, in this case, has a very wide lead, at least in the very early voting. And let's take a look at the presidential map. We'll see that in just a minute here of what's happening nationwide. And there, Trump also has a lead with what's been called so far 137 electoral votes to 104 for Hillary Clinton. A lot of the same states that we've been watching all evening, we're still watching them. They're still shaded, just as North Carolina and Florida, Ohio shaded with Donald Trump leading in those states. Dan, what's your take on what we're seeing so far?
I think it's fair to say that the night has not gone the way a lot of Democrats and the pundits expected. At this point, 4 years ago, of the 13 battleground states, the networks had already called 2 of them, and we're getting ready to call some more. Tonight, they've called none of them. So you can see there's that Trump is outperforming expectations. It's very close in Florida. It is very close in Virginia, which people thought was going to be a Clinton stronghold, and she still might win it, but it's way more close than we expected. North Carolina, again, looks like there's a possibility that Trump could win that, when all the indications had been that it would be Clinton territory.
Yeah, so on the map, as people have described it ahead of time, Trump has very few paths to victory if the map holds, but if he starts breaking through in Virginia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, other states, that changes the whole dynamic of the evening.
Right, the whole map. And the New York Times had this prediction as to what percentage chance there would be that either candidate will win, and it got to 90%, that Hillary Clinton had a 90% chance of winning. Now they're saying it's 50-50. So
I was watching that before. It's like the little meters like jiggling back and forth.
But it's based on the results that are in so far. Right. So there are a lot of states that will be favorable to her, like California, that aren't in there yet. But right now there have been no indications. The people with the Clinton campaign in Wisconsin say that they're not nervous at all about the state, and they're still very confident, despite what those early numbers showed.
Yeah. What else you've been hearing from the operatives and folks out there on what are they
It's
watching?
funny, before the polls closed here, all of the momentum, everybody was excited on the Dem side, and that's quickly changing. And the people helping out Ron Johnson are telling me now that they are cautiously optimistic, and that Ron Johnson's outperforming Donald Trump in Waukesha County, which is huge. He has to do better, and he's doing it. I think it's like 17,000 more votes than Trump has gotten in Waukesha County, and we'll have to see if that trend continues in Ozaukee and Washington counties.
Yeah. So if you're
the Democrats here, do you think they're more interested in the presidential race? Are they worried about Russ now? How do you decide? How do you measure out what to worry about at a point like this when there's so much?
Well, I think people were thrown off by the fact that the results had not gone as planned in Virginia. In particular, I think Virginia was the thing that shook up a lot of people. And again, Hillary Clinton might win it, but no one expected it to be this
I think
close.
one of the rules of thumb in Virginia is that the Democratic areas come in later.
Yeah, and Fairfax is the area that's missing right now, and so that's why people are saying
the dynamic could change very quickly for Hillary Clinton.
But I still think
pulls through, say, Florida, or North Carolina.
Right. But again, the analysis has said that she's underperformed among Hispanics in Florida, which no one saw that coming. So you were asking, what are they focused on? I think if you're a Wisconsin person, you care about the U.S. Senate. And now things have been thrown into even more, it become a little more chaotic because West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin is saying that he might flip parties now from being a Democrat to the Republican if it's 50-50.
Right. Well, that would shake up the Senate
even more.
As well. Yeah.
So, and there's a little bit of hostility actually going on toward Russ Feingold. Some people think that he made this race a lot closer than it needed to be. And if he loses, seriously, there was nobody a month and a half ago that saw Ron Johnson winning.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit too about the other races here at the state level.
Congressional
races,
right?
That's favorable to the
it's
to
all
Republicans,
it's all the incumbents, and then it looks like Mike Gallagher is going to win. And early on there was an expectation that would be close, but the Fox Valley has turned very solidly in the recent months to the conservative candidates, and so the expectation was that Gallagher would win. In the other races, I think it's no surprise Gwen Moore obviously won, Paul Ryan won, and I think Sensenbrenner's already won, and then the other one's Duffy's. Duffy's an interesting one because he's going to win. He campaigned pretty hard for Donald Trump. And so will there be, some sort of a backlash for his, he, unlike Paul Ryan, embraced Donald Trump and was supportive of him. And he's very much looking at running against Tammy Baldwin in 2018. So that's, that's what's
he would need a strong showing there that would help him make his case for 2018, right?
And there are going to be a lot of people in 2018 interested in running because the numbers aren't favorable for Tammy Baldwin. But, in terms of, I have to figure out who the winners and losers are in this election. Tammy Baldwin has, she's been working hard to try to increase her visibility in the state. She had a problem similar to Ron Johnson. Both of them, it was an amazing thing. More than a third of the Wisconsin voters had no idea who our two senators were just 6 months ago. Ron Johnson has fixed that, obviously, with all the ads that have been going on back and forth, but Tammy Baldwin's still dealing with that issue.
Yeah, well, of course, in Wisconsin, this rule of thumb is in reverse, that in a presidential year is stronger for the Democrats, which is how Tammy Baldwin was elected the first time.
Right.
This would be an off year, so to speak, when it's better for the Republicans, when Scott Walker's done so well.
And so that's why you have so many names floating around. You have Dale Koyenga is being discussed as a possible candidate. Leah Vukmir is being discussed as a possible candidate. Sean Duffy, Eric Hovde is people are saying might want to run again, and who knows who else might want to get involved. I would love to see Scott Walker run in this race in 2018, but he has to decide pretty quickly what he's going to do with his future after this race. But I think right now, in terms of pundits and everybody, the focus is nationally on what's happening in all these other states. I think in about 45 minutes, the focus will shift to Wisconsin and who's going to win here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, let's talk about briefly. Paul Ryan was one who had his race called. Was hardly sweating it out. He's seemingly more of a challenge in the GOP primary and handled that well. But what's he thinking tonight? Because he's seeing,
and it looks like he's secured a control for the Republicans in the House already. They've
spent a lot of time in the stretch campaigning for other candidates
anywhere where Donald Trump was not. Right. So what does this mean? Well, first of all, there have been stories circulating saying that some of the Republicans, and not just members of the Freedom Caucus, were asking him to delay a vote for the Speaker. He responded by going out and announcing, "I am going to run for re-election." It's interesting. It wasn't so long ago that we had Paul Ryan telling us that he really didn't want this job.
Right, it was like, don't give it to me. I don't want it. If I called upon, I will not serve. Practically, then he's.
But now we're going to find out how badly he does want it, because there probably will be people who don't want him as speaker and who will challenge him. And it's been a long time since he's had a major political fight. I think the last major political fight he had was his first term in 1998. Very token opposition since then. So that's the question. It's not did he keep his seat, he was going to do that, or whether the Republicans are going to keep the House, they're going to do that. It's does he want to remain speaker? He says yes, and will he get the votes to do that?
Right. When some of the calculation, of course, for his own political ambitions, if he was wanting to run for president again in 4 years or in 8 years,
well, again,
then how do you need to succeed as speaker, right? You can't just sort of walk away from that and say, well, that didn't work out as I had thought.
Yeah, I mean, it would be crazy if Trump wins and the two of them would have to work together, because I don't think. I don't think either of them have thought through that scenario as to what they would do with one another. But and if Hillary Clinton wins, then the question will be how much deal making he'll want to do. Will he be Dr. No and oppose everything that they're doing, or will he compromise and work with them? And if he does that, then he puts his position in jeopardy.
That depends too on the Senate. Does it go Democratic? Does it stay Republican? Is there sort of a unified?
And right now we don't know. Right now we don't know what's going to happen there. We don't even know in Wisconsin who's going to win and win the race here. But so a lot of things still in the air at this time.
All right. Well, Dan, I think we'll have you back soon as we talk about more on the results. In the meantime, we're going to go to a segment here with Angie Holan, who's the editor of PolitiFact National, talking about their experience fact-checking this absolutely crazy election we faced and we just finished. We're joined by Angie Holan, who's editor of PolitiFact.com. The Journal Sentinel, of course, is part of the PolitiFact network with PolitiFactWisconsin.com. So, Angie, the election is just about over here. It's done. This is the third presidential campaign that you guys have covered. Talk to us a little bit about what made this one different or unique compared to the past two elections you guys did.
Well, I think the headline for us would be Donald Trump. He's a very unorthodox candidate. He comes out of the New York real estate world and the world of reality television. And he just spoke unlike any traditional politician that we've covered. I think most people are used to his straight talk, the kind of staccato speaking style, kind of stream of conscience. From a fact-checking perspective, he got a lot of things wrong. And his PolitiFact scorecard is more wrong than any other presidential candidate we've ever checked. About 70% of his claims have gotten into negative territory. That's the mostly false, the false, or the pants on fire. Hillary Clinton, we checked in 2008 during the primary when she went against Barack Obama. Hillary Clinton is very much a known quantity to the American public and to fact checkers. She is very lawyerly. She's famous for her preparation. And she doesn't make a lot of factual errors. So the same statistic for her of the mostly false or pants on fire claims are about 30%. So much lower than Donald Trump.
Yeah, let me ask this because we get the question in Milwaukee often, and when I'm out and talking with people is, do you find it frustrating that someone like Donald Trump would keep repeating the same false claim over and over? Is that just better business for the fact checkers, or what? How do you respond to things like that?
It's not so much frustrating as it is kind of mystifying. I really don't understand why he keeps repeating the same false things over and over. And in Trump's case, sometimes he would get talking points wrong where there was no clear political advantage to it. Some other journalists have noted that as well. It's really like, it's either he's not interested in being factually accurate or he doesn't care. It's more puzzling than anything else.
Yeah, and as this campaign cycle, how much pushback did you get from the candidates or the supporters in terms of the checks on different claims? Were they particularly aggressive or not very aggressive, or do they kind of know the drill by now?
To me, it felt pretty normal with a few exceptions. For one thing, I think the Trump campaign during the primaries was running on a shoestring staff. So I would say more than average, we just didn't get any response when we would inquire about our fact checks. And the first step in the PolitiFact process is to contact the speaker when we're fact-checking something. So we always go to the campaigns and say, what's your evidence? At first, we just didn't get much of a reply from Trump. Now that we're in the general election and he's added staff, we've gotten more of a reply. The Clinton campaign was responding to us from the very beginning and at length. They would always provide a lot of documentation for what she was saying or what we were checking about her. So those were the candidates. From the public, we got mixed reactions. We always get a lot of letters from readers thanking us for our work, and we continue to get that. We always get some complaints saying that we have a liberal bias, and we continue to get that. I don't agree with that. I think we're transparent in our methods and independent in our outlook, but that is a complaint. We got some complaints from the left side of the spectrum saying that we were too hard on Democrats trying to engage in false equivalence. I don't agree with that. But I do think that there's just kind of astonishment at this Trump candidacy because it's so different from what we've seen before. Yeah. So that's how I would sum up the reaction.
Yeah, one of the other different features on this election seemed to be that the volume of places, media outlets, other entities that are doing fact-checking compared to, say, 2008 when you had pretty much the territory to yourselves. How did that change things in your mind? And is that a good thing, a bad thing, a neutral thing? How would you grade that out?
Well, as someone who supports American journalism and who supports accuracy, I loved it. It was great from that point of view. We did see more and more media outlets doing their own fact-checking. General news organizations who might not have fact-checked last cycle would run special fact-checking reports this cycle. So there was more competition from the fact-checkers. I also saw a lot more fact-checking in what you would call traditional stories. So it wasn't so much labeled a fact-checker, say, or done by specialized fact-checkers. It was just beat reporters writing the news of the day and including in their stories, this is not true, this is not accurate. Independent fact-checkers have found that this is wrong. So there was just a lot more fact-checking this year.
All right, and finally, let me ask you to look ahead a bit at the remainder of this year and then into next year. I know there's the end of Obama's term is coming up. I assume there'll be a Trump-a-meter or a Clinton-a-meter starting in January, but what do you guys have planned in the months ahead?
Well, in the months ahead, we are wrapping up our Obameter coverage. This is our coverage of Barack Obama's campaign promises from 2008 and 2012. We'll be looking back at his presidency. We should be picking a lie of the year for 2016, which is always a popular reader feature. And then next year, we'll be unveiling either the Hillary Clinton promise meter or the Donald Trump promise meter, and following their promises to see what they say. And then with the new administration, there's usually attempts at legislation. And whenever Congress is in session and considering making changes to the laws, we always find a lot to fact check. So we'll be there for that.
All right. Well, we hope for you that in your future is a long nap or a long vacation. And thanks for joining us this evening.
Thanks, Craig.
We're back now. I want to go through some of the latest results here in Wisconsin on some of the key races. So let's start with the presidential race in Wisconsin, where Donald Trump currently has 50% of the vote. Hillary Clinton's 45%. Now that's different than what the exit polls were suggesting earlier, and these results, of course, are pretty early. We'll also show the U.S. Senate race, where Ron Johnson at this stage has a bit of an advantage on Russ Feingold again. As Dan Bice told us earlier, the Democrats are still pretty confident on that vote. And again, it depends on where these returns are from. And then finally, the 8th Congressional District, where Mike Gallagher continues to hold his lead over Tom Nelson. This is the open seat in the Green Bay area, the only open seat this year in the congressional races. And this is the seat that Reed Ribble used to hold. He's stepping down after several terms. And let's look at the national picture. The latest numbers from USA Today, where Donald Trump right now has 140 votes. That's well on the way to 270 for those keeping track at home. Hillary Clinton has 104. The map, again, there's still so many key states. The ones that would really tell the tale for the evening have not been announced or called one way or the other. That includes Florida, North Carolina, Ohio, even Virginia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. These are all critical states that we should have a much better picture on over the next, hour to hour and a half, I would imagine. So let's talk about where we are now with our two of our editorial page columnists, James Causey and Christian Schneider. Okay, put your prediction hats on for just a minute. So it's early. We still have print newspapers to put out at some point. There's going to be a deadline. What's going to be the headline on the print story tomorrow morning, James?
I'm putting my hat on right now. I predict
it's a very stylish hat.
Stylish hat. Hillary Clinton wins.
Okay, so your headline is Clinton wins.
Clinton wins, bottom headline, Feingold pulls off the squeaker.
Okay. Christian, what would you say is your most likely headline right now?
I mean, I think it's it's foolish at this point to predict that Donald Trump isn't going to keep. There's something out there. There's something happening right now, and I can't explain it. I would caution, however, in Wisconsin, I think we showed him up 5 points here right now. Just in the couple of minutes that we had, I went and looked at kind of what the vote in Dane County was right now, and there's about 100,000 votes out there, or that have been counted so far. I think there were like 340,000 in 2012. So we're still looking at 240,000 votes out in Dane County. Those numbers always kind of like a snake, like a pig through a snake. They kind of like work their way through the system and then finally catch up at the end. Yeah, I mean, he's pulling off the inside straight right now. He's doing what he has to do, and we could be getting into this territory. I mean, it seemed all so fanciful just a few days ago about
so your headline is opinion columnist eats his own hat or something on the.
I narrowly avoided making some kind of foolish bet like that, but I would have bet anything that this wasn't going to happen. Now we thought Virginia looked like it was going his way. Now it's turned back. You don't know what's still out there in North Carolina and Florida, and there's some other places like that. But I mean, right now, if I were a Trump supporter, I'd be the happiest person in the world.
Yeah. Well, if you look at it, though, okay, so all the advantages that are seemingly the ones that you're going to get out the vote, organization and so forth, were favoring Hillary Clinton. The polls were suggesting that. Were the polls, do you think, missing some of these Trump supporters? Were folks saying they're called up and asked who they're going to vote for? Maybe they're not willing to so overtly describe it, or what do you think is happening here that would suggest that all these states, as Dan Bice said earlier, not just one or two haven't been called, but all these key states are too close to call?
I mean, I suppose. This would be the death of polling if this were to happen. I mean, maybe there is something to the fact that, if somebody calls you and asks you if you're going to vote for Donald Trump, you won't say yes. But I would think, just from my perspective, going into a voting booth and looking at a ballot, I would think, I'd have more hesitation about pulling the trigger than telling somebody on the phone. So I don't know. I mean, I suppose the guy that looks best in all this is Nate Silver of 538.com, who was a little bit more pessimistic about Hillary Clinton's chances. Like, New York Times had her up about, the chances of her winning at 85%, something like that. But yeah, evidently they saw something that nobody else did. So,
James, what do you think? I mean, is that people didn't fully register the Trump supporters, or are we going to find out later that maybe the core constituency for the Democrats didn't get enthused about Hillary Clinton as they did about Barack Obama?
Well, we know they're not as enthused about Hillary as they were by President Barack Obama. Well, I think what this shows is that both sides really pushed to get people out to the polls, and just as many. When I went to my polling place, the line was long. We're seeing long lines all across this state and across this country. So both sides are polling well. So I'm a little surprised at this map so far. Especially in Florida, when they had near record number of people vote early, and then you see something like this. It's a little surprising.
But when you say both sides got their people out to vote, I mean, Donald Trump literally had so little. Like ground game, so volunteers and offices and all that kind of stuff. So I mean, how does that happen? I mean, Democrats kind of have a built-in framework. They do this every election, and yet
maybe think about this. Maybe it was just so anti-Trump that his people just really dug in and just say, I don't care what the media is saying. I don't care what anybody's saying. I'm going to go to the polls and I'm going to vote.
What's interesting, the rule of thumb used to be that you needed to give people something to vote for, not just to vote against to get them to the polls. And now maybe that counterbalances when both sides have somebody to go vote against.
Right.
Given these two, the Trump side would say, well, Hillary Clinton, she's going to take over the Supreme Court for our generation. She's going to go on and on. And this Trump, you can't trust him with the nuclear codes. He's irrational and erratic. It sort of created this toxic stew that maybe everybody got to go vote anyways.
Yeah, this does speak to, even up until the last polls, Donald Trump had like a 60% unfavorable rating. And to see that he's doing as well as he is to now, that just goes to show what a missed opportunity this was, or potentially could be for Hillary Clinton. Like, all she had to do was just kind of not screw this up, and I think she managed to do it.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about the Senate race. You feeling comfortable for Russ Feingold, James, do you think, or what? Where's that one going to come down? Write your headline for that race.
Feingold wins.
By a squeaker.
By a squeaker. I think Ron Johnson ran a nice campaign. I think he got out there. He explained who he was. I think his ads were a little quirky, changing the diaper and all that kind of stuff. But he showed some personality, something that he didn't show the first time around. And I think he ran a great campaign. So that's partly why this race would be closer than a lot of people anticipated. And that's why he closed the gap, because he was down by a lot, in early polls. But I think he did a lot to close the gap. But I think this is Feingold's race, and it's been his race ever since he announced that he was in it. So if he blows this could probably be the end of his political career.
Yeah, I imagine it would be.
Yeah. You would think.
Yeah. But if he does win, that's we had this statistic in our news article this morning on how many years since anybody came back and in a rematch regained their seat. But what's your headline on that race at this stage?
The Tommy Thompson effect. Here's the most popular person in Wisconsin history, and yet he loses in 2012. So it seemed at the time like when Wisconsin voters were kind of done with you, they were kind of done with you. But everything was working in Feingold's favor this year. So for him to lose would be huge news.
Oh, yeah.
And I think right now you're asking for a headline. I think Ron Johnson's actually probably got a better than 50-50 chance of winning it. Just kind of seeing where we're seeing the votes come in right now. Right now in Waukesha County, and this kind of talks about Trump too. Ron Johnson is running about 7 points ahead of Donald Trump in Waukesha County, which is kind of a bellwether. So it's like people either really, really like Ron Johnson in those areas, or they just really hate Donald Trump, and so he's running that far behind.
Or they got to know Ron Johnson through his campaigns this time, and they didn't get a chance to know him last time. I don't know.
Possible.
All right. Well, we'll leave that discussion there for now and go to a segment here on another important set of races on the ballot at the state level, which are the state Senate campaigns. And there's only a few that have a real competitive nature, but we'll get this preview on which of those races are the ones to watch tonight. We're joined now by Jason Stein of our Madison Bureau to talk about the state Senate races that are in play today. Jason, let's start with the big picture here now. There, with redistricting and things, there aren't a lot of really competitive state Senate races out there this year, are there?
No, really in legislative races, we've seen a lack of competition, at least in general election between the major parties, a lack of competition that we really haven't seen in at least a decade. So there are about 2 or 3 Senate races that we're watching closely. The main 2 ones are the 14th district, where Senator Luther Olson has a difficult re-election fight, and then the 18th district, which is an empty seat that was previously held by Senator Gudex, now Winnebago County Executive Mark Harris, running against Fond du Lac Republican activist Dan Fayen.
Right, and those are both cases where the Democrats are hoping to pick up the seat, if I remember correctly. And what are the odds there, do you think, for them to make any gains in those races? What will it take?
The 18th Senate District around Fond du Lac has appeared to really be a toss-up race. The other race, perhaps slight edge to Senator Olson, but again, both those very competitive races. Really, elsewhere in the other 16, 17 state Senate races, you're really not seeing a good deal of competition, but we'll be also watching races involving Tom Tiffany in northeast Wisconsin, Sheila Harsdorf in northwest Wisconsin, and Senate Minority Leader Jennifer Schilling around La Crosse.
All right, and looking ahead, I mean, the general conventional wisdom out there is that the Democrats might pick up a seat or two but not gain control of the Senate, and that the Republicans will keep comfortably control of the Assembly. And of course, Scott Walker is still around for 2 years more. What do you anticipate going forward? Any change in the tone or the type of issues coming up, or will it just sort of be more of the same as we move into the last 2 years of Walker's term?
Oh, that's an interesting question, Greg. You know, one thing you have to remember that even if Democrats pick up a few seats, a couple seats in the Senate and several seats in the Assembly, that doesn't necessarily mean that the Republican agenda will become more moderate. It will certainly be more difficult for Scott Walker to pass his budget and Senate Majority Leader Scott Fitzgerald to get the budget passed. But in many cases, the Republican senators who would lose would be more from your moderate wing of the party, and there have been more conservative senators who are going to be moving into that body going forward. So, you know, you should not necessarily expect that you're going to see something different than the fairly aggressive conservative agenda that you've seen from this legislature and governor over the last several years.
All right, well, that's a good point to leave our discussion as we're getting into things here on election night. So thanks for joining us, Jason, and we'll probably be checking back in with you later.
Thank you.
I'm David Haynes, and I'm back again. We're going to go to a few headlines now. Trump is holding a razor-thin lead in Florida. So far, also, no crucial swing states have been called yet. Trump is showing surprising strength in some of the battleground states. Jim Sensenbrenner and Glenn Grothman both win re-election to the Congress, as does Gwen Moore. We're going to be watching throughout the night these battleground states because Donald Trump is showing a lot of strength there. I think more than some of the polling even showed. So we'll have to see how that turns out as the night goes on. But I'd like to go now to Patrick Marley of the Journal Sentinel's Madison Bureau. And Patrick, you're watching state races, particularly in the state Senate. What are you seeing there so far?
So Dan Fine has won the 18th Senate district. That's in the Fond du Lac area. Rick Gudex had held that seat, didn't run for re-election. The Democrats were hoping to take that seat with it being open, but Dan Fine's a Republican. He held on to that seat, so that's a win for the Republicans. There's really one other race that Democrats had their hopes on, and that is the 14th Senate district. They're trying to dislodge Luther Olson, who's been in there for some time. We don't have enough results in to know how that's going to go, but really that would be a small victory for Democrats if they were able to take that. Republicans have a 19-14 majority in the Senate, so it would just chip into their majority. But
right. No chance to retake the majority there. And in the state assembly, that's a gargantuan gap for the Democrats. But there's a chance they might pick up a few seats, I understand.
Right. The Republicans have a 63-36 majority in the state assembly, so it's solidly in Republican hands. The Democrats are really focused on just a small handful of seats. There's maybe 4 to 6 that are in play. I don't think it can be expected that they would win all of those. So even if they have a good night, they're still going to be pretty deep in the minority. It's looking.
Yeah. Any surprises in the voting out your way so far?
Other than, at the top of the ticket, looking very tight. But in the state legislative races, we have not seen a lot of surprises. Don't have a ton of results in. The Fine race is one of the few that's been called.
Right. And nothing you've seen so far that would indicate there's any real change in how either house is going to be made up after they come back at the first of the year. The Republicans still strongly in charge based on what we know now, at least.
Right. Republicans have really steadily controlled state government since 2011 when Scott Walker came in. His party has had both houses of the legislature almost that entire time. There was a small sliver of time when the Democrats won some recalls that they controlled the state Senate, but at that point the legislature wasn't in session, so they really couldn't do anything. So we'll see the Republicans still controlling state government, and by similar margins in both houses. Now we have seen some divisions within the party over, for instance, transportation. Right. We'll have to see with the state budget how things go there.
Well, I was going to ask you if you could just take a second and talk about 2 or 3 of the top priorities that are coming up in the next session. Certainly the transportation budget is one of them. A real split there among the Republicans about what to do.
That's right. I'd say that's the biggest fight that we've seen so far. Assembly Republicans are saying they see a need for more revenue. That likely would mean a gas tax. They haven't specified how they would raise that money. But really, it's very difficult to see how they could get that through. Governor Walker has consistently said he would not allow a gas tax to go through. That's very hard for a party, especially one that's fractured. You know, it's not like all legislators are on the same side on that issue. They're divided within themselves. So to get that through would be very hard. Another issue we're seeing is the Republicans have been talking about trying to put more money towards schools. We'll see if they're able to do that. We haven't really gotten a clear picture of what the next budget is going to look like.
K through 12 schools, you mean there?
Correct.
Right. What about higher ed? What have you heard about the potential for the UW budget?
Well, I think some supporters of UW are hoping that they can get some of the money back from the $250 million cut that they took in the last budget. Right. Again, we don't know what the budget figures are going to be like, but for them to get much of that back seems very difficult because the state finances appear to be like they'll be tight again.
And the next legislative session is really sort of right around the corner, right?
It kicks off in January. Everybody gets seated then. It's quiet for a little while. Then in February, the governor will introduce his budget, and then they'll spend from then into the summer. If they have a real fight over transportation, it could spill past the middle of the summer when it's supposed to be done, and kind of go from there.
All right. Patrick Marley, thanks so much for taking the time on a busy night. We appreciate it.
You bet. Thanks, Dave.
That's Patrick Marley of our Madison Bureau. And now we're going to go to a segment on Paul Ryan that looks at some of the challenges that the House Speaker is going to be facing no matter what happens yet tonight. I'm David Haynes, and I'm with Craig Gilbert of our Washington Bureau. So aside from Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, there's one man who has as much at stake tonight as they do, and that's Paul Ryan. So what is at stake, and what might his reaction be?
So the biggest thing is the Republican Party's majority in the House, which is the reason why he's our Speaker. Democrats have to gain 30 seats. There aren't a lot of competitive seats these days because of redistricting and because of the geography of where people live. Republicans have a real advantage on the map, on the playing field. So even in a year when Democrats may have a better night at the top of the ticket, most people don't expect them to take back the House. So the question is, if Paul Ryan has a smaller margin coming out than he had going in theory, that makes it harder for him to manage his own caucus, and he's also engendered some ill will from the kind of more militant conservatives in his caucus.
Isn't there something about the composition of that caucus that could change, though, too?
Yeah, so if the seats that are most likely to go down are in these kind of suburban battleground districts, they're more moderate, so he could lose some of his kind of moderate supporters in the Republican caucus. He still has, clearly pretty lopsided support within the caucus. And the problem for the people that want to get rid of him as Speaker is they don't really have an alternative candidate that they can sell their caucus on. Right. They're looking for some concessions. But there's also just some bitterness and some anger and irritation on the part of some conservatives in the House who feel like Ryan hasn't been supportive enough of Trump. And this is one of those cases where Ryan is getting it from both sides. He's getting it from the anti-Trump people who think it's just beyond the pale for him to have supported Trump at all, and he's getting it from the pro-Trump people who think he hasn't been a good soldier.
Well, he said he wouldn't campaign with him, and then last weekend he was supposed to, and then it didn't happen, and so a strained relationship, to say the least. Is his speakership vulnerable?
Well, I think my expectation is he'll be reelected Speaker. What's going to happen is after the election, in that first week, there'll be an internal process within the Republican caucus or conference, and they'll make a decision about who their candidate for the speakership is. The Speaker isn't elected or reelected until January when the new House meets, and he needs a majority of the vote. So if he has the Republican votes and the Republicans are the majority, he becomes the Speaker. There are some crazy things that could happen under that scenario if some Republicans want to withhold their votes for him. But, you know, it's not just the House majority that's at stake. It's also his sort of political national future as a potential presidential candidate and his leadership in the party. We have a party that seems to be sort of split right now, maybe between a Ryan wing and a Trump wing. And so going forward, he's got to deal with the baggage of this very divisive election internally and his rift, on again, off again rift with Trump. Which has even cost him some support in his home state, where he remains pretty popular and pretty popular among Republicans, but not as popular as he was before he tangled with Donald Trump.
So there's been some speculation that he might leave the speakership, that he might be in a better position to run for president. Do you think that's the case? I mean, could he possibly go back to Ways and Means?
He could. I mean, he has been pretty adamant that he's going to seek re-election for the speakership. Now, there may be a scenario where if conditions are imposed upon him and he's asked to take on a weaker speakership, then that's something he might walk away from. And it's something he threatened to walk away from when he was originally elected as Speaker. So that is a possible scenario. The other question is if, assuming he's re-elected as Speaker, you know, one key is going to be whether the Senate is in Democratic or Republican hands. If it's in Democratic hands and he's the only bulwark against the Democrats, he's under tremendous pressure. And all the pressure is on him because he's the only one with any power, the only Republican with any power. So he's going to be faced with the choice of cutting deals with the Democrats, which is anathema to a lot of Republicans, or maybe just letting the government grind to a halt, which comes with its own fallout. It's a you know, if it was a rough job before, it's going to be even a rougher job moving forward.
Well, he's never struck me as someone who wants the government to grind to a halt. He
no,
seems to
that
be
hasn't
the kind
been
of guy who wants to get something done.
That hasn't been his history, but the problem is you end up paying a higher price for that in this new world where the party has been kind of made, it's a more militant party. You have the Trump effect. And then again, if he's the only guy they got, the Republican base is mad enough at Republicans in Washington already. If they feel like they're not doing enough to stop the Democrats, if the Democrats are in the White House and in the Senate, then a lot of that falls on Paul Ryan.
All right. Craig, thanks so much.
Great.
Now I'm back with Mary Spicuzza. Mary's a reporter for the Journal Sentinel. And we're going to look at the map now and sort of do an update as to where we're at. I mentioned earlier in this segment that Donald Trump is showing a lot of strength in some of these battleground states, I think more than some expected. But Mary, you've got a few states that have recently been called.
Right. So it sounds like Clinton won Virginia after all. That was kind of neck and neck for a while, but it looked like there were some votes coming in late for Clinton on that one. She's projected to win Michigan, which had emerged as a battleground recently. They had both made kind of last-minute stops there. That has not been officially called, but it sounds like the Detroit Free Press is saying she's projected to win.
Looks like it's going to go her way.
And then Trump getting Ohio, looks like. So I think that's actually been called or projected.
Right.
It's hard to keep up. But yeah, so I think it's a lot tighter race than a lot of people expected.
Yeah, Florida is, of course, still the one that's on everyone's mind.
Right.
If Trump wins Florida, his path remains open, particularly since he won Ohio.
It did sound like there were some districts coming in that would be more likely to lean for Clinton. Last I heard, I was waiting to hear more about Tampa, about Gainesville area, some areas that might be more likely to go Democrat, but that was extremely tight, like 0.5 away last time.
Yeah, right now with 99% of the vote in Florida, Trump is up by a percentage point. That may be actually be less than a percentage point. So if Trump wins Florida, his path is still alive. If Hillary Clinton wins Florida, that's tough for Trump to win at that point, particularly without Michigan.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think there are a few states that people are still very closely watching, and I would say Florida's probably at the top of that list.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked to you earlier about a couple of things. I want to sort of go back over that ground again.
Mm-hmm.
What were you seeing with turnout in Wisconsin?
So I didn't hear, from what it sounded like high volume, not a ton of major problems. Waukesha had run out of votes in a few polling places. It sounds like they got that fixed. It sounds like as far as the city of Milwaukee, there haven't been problems, but Neil Albrecht, the head of elections for the city, said that there's just an extremely high volume, and so they have, I think he said 15,000 additional absentee ballots compared to 2012. They still do expect to be done counting by like between 11 to midnight, which is still much better. He said in 2012 they were counting until about 2:30 in the morning.
Right.
So, but obviously city of Milwaukee projected to be a heavy Democratic turnout, which is good news for Hillary Clinton, good news for Russ Feingold. I think they are, clearly places like city of Milwaukee, Dane County, Madison, not a huge Trump base or Johnson base in those voters.
Right. Now, I've also heard, though, that the turnout in the WOW counties, Waukesha, Ozaukee, was also quite high. So that's where you would expect Ron Johnson in particular to run up the score.
And I was covering a rally on Saturday with Paul Ryan, Ron Johnson, Mike Pence, Scott Walker, and the message that they were really hitting hard at that rally was, it's time to come home. Let's put our differences aside, vote for Republicans up and down the ticket, regardless of what you think of necessarily the top of the ticket. So I think that they're certainly hoping that that message sunk in, and a high turnout, especially if it goes for Trump in those counties, would show that that message did sink in, and that people in the end, whether or not they were very reluctant Trump supporters, and we saw some people in that county who maybe he was like their fifth pick for who they wanted to see be president. So, but I think in the end,
a lot of them wanted our governor to be president.
Governor Walker,
a ton of support in the state,
right?
Obviously.
Or Ted Cruz, who won,
the state in the primary,
right? And certainly did better in those areas. I think some people would have probably gone for Marco Rubio, maybe even Jeb Bush. So, I don't think Trump was necessarily at the top of their list. But come Election Day, I think when they're staring at Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton, a lot of voters backing Scott Walker, Paul Ryan, Ron Johnson are probably not going to necessarily want to gravitate toward Hillary Clinton.
So you've also been doing some reporting, and obviously it's way too early to know who's going to win the presidency at this point, but you've done some reporting on what it means for Hillary Clinton, if she does win, to be the first woman president. What have you found there?
It's interesting. So women, the 19th Amendment, 1920, so that's been almost 100 years that women have had the right to vote. We have not had a woman president yet, and I think that a lot of Hillary supporters really feel like this is the time. We saw people going to Susan B. Anthony's grave in Rochester, New York, and putting
I voted
stickers, flowers, mementos. Maybe in hindsight, people will feel like that was a jinx. I don't know, but I guess it depends how this turns out. But we saw a lot of people wearing pantsuits, wearing suffragette white, doing there were Pantsuit Nation Facebook group that I think had about almost 3 million supporters last time I looked. It was kind of an ode to Hillary Clinton on Facebook. So it's interesting because it would obviously be historic. Our first president took office more than 200 years ago, 226, 227, and this would be the first time that we have a woman in the highest office. And obviously other countries have led the way, and we've had plenty of other countries that have had a woman president or a woman head of state, but the U.S. has kind of lagged behind in that way.
Right.
Obviously, there are a lot of women who don't necessarily support Hillary Clinton and would like to see a woman be president who is not Hillary Clinton, and probably on the left it would be Elizabeth Warren. On the right it might be, obviously a Republican woman. So.
Right. But it is sort of hard to see who the next woman in line would be to run for this office at this point.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, a lot of Bernie supporters would like to see Elizabeth Warren, but she is certainly not a, moderate mainstream Democrat on the Republican side. Probably years ago, people would have liked to see Sarah Palin. Her political career has obviously stumbled, and I don't think that there is necessarily another Republican woman who you think like she's next in line. I think maybe, a lot of people like Nikki Haley on the Republican side, But
actually, Nikki Haley is a rising star in the Republican
Sure,
Party.
but obviously, as we saw from Governor Walker's run, it's a lot different to run for governor than to run for president,
Absolutely.
and there are no guarantees on how you're going to do on a national stage.
Right, and a lot of it depends on what happens tonight, who wins, and who's in front of you.
Right, and 4 years is a really, really long time.
It's a really long time.
I remember covering Governor Walker's win 2 years ago when his acceptance speech winning the governor's term felt like a presidential speech where he was talking about America, and
Absolutely.
we all after that speech thought like, okay, we're going to be in Iowa covering him, which we were, and obviously he was after his speech in January, I think a lot of people saw him as a front runner, and that was not a long run, 71, 72 days. Yeah,
he was for a while. But crazy
things
year.
change quickly, yeah.
Crazy year because the people who had money, and he had some money for a while, but Jeb Bush, for example,
oh my gosh,
money didn't really matter that much this year on the Republican side.
Nope, not in the primary. I think Jeb Bush was so well funded, and the PACs, the network, the team that he had, but it didn't really seem, it seemed like people had already decided they didn't want another Bush, regardless of who the first name was.
And he was not, nor was Governor Walker really a strong candidate in the primary season.
What did Donald Trump always call Jeb Bush? Low energy? Was that right.
So anyway, well, we're going to take a look at the results now and sort of update you on that. And we'll try to get someone else in here to talk about what's going on. At the moment, and it's early, but at the moment, Donald Trump is leading the Electoral College tally by 168 votes to 131 for Hillary Clinton. Now, a lot of the larger states are yet to come in. In the popular vote, as you can see on the screen there, Trump has a lead of roughly 27,000, 25,000 votes and leads by about a percentage point. Now, keep in mind that on the popular vote, Clinton is likely to trail in that for a while because the state of California, which is likely to be a strong state for her, will come in later on tonight. Ron Johnson's still up on Russ Feingold. We still have a lot of precincts to come in, presumably, as Mary, you said, probably in more of the Democratic strongholds, but that's yet to come. In the 8th Congressional District, this is an open seat with the retirement of Reed Ribble. Mike Gallagher, at this point at least, is ahead handily over the Outagamie County Executive Tom Nelson, the Democrat. Mike Gallagher, an advisor to Governor Walker and a Marine, first time running for office, has run a good campaign up there and may indeed be a congressman from Wisconsin when this is done. Now we go back to the map, and as you can see, I've got Christian Schneider here with me now, a columnist for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. Do we have a call on Florida? Have you heard? Let me check.
It should be forthcoming shortly, I would think.
I don't see one yet, but they're close. They have most of the vote in there.
Yep.
Chris, what are you seeing at this point?
Well, I've mainly been looking at Wisconsin because what we've been seeing is I think Ron Johnson right now is up on Russ Feingold by 7 points. Mm-hmm. This is kind of typically how elections in Wisconsin work, where you have the numbers from the WOW counties kind of come in early. So those counties are pretty much baked into the cake right now. They're almost all in. So now Republicans just kind of have to sit and kind of hang on for dear life while the numbers from Dane County and Milwaukee County come in. Still a lot of votes out there to be had. So I don't know if you're going to see the Johnson-Trump numbers go up, but I think you're going to see some catching up from the Democrats a little bit. But it's going to be tight, a lot tighter than we thought, I think.
No doubt. So on the presidential race, are you surprised how well Trump has done in some of these battleground states.
Yes, I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, that's kind of the story of the night, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I was on earlier with Greg, and we talked about this could be a real blow for polling if it turns out in some of these states the way that it is, and those who kind of gave Trump more of a chance.
And we've got
are actually looking pretty
AP
good.
is now reporting that Donald Trump is projected to win the state of Florida. That keeps alive his path to the presidency. If he had lost, the conventional wisdom was that was very difficult for him to win. But he apparently now, according to the Associated Press, has won Florida. So his path to the presidency is still alive. What does Hillary Clinton's... What does she have to do the rest of the night? The firewall of Pennsylvania, that's one of her states. She's got to win there. Got to win Wisconsin.
Yeah, I don't know how much of North Carolina's still out. I think that's pretty much done. I know Ohio's been called for Trump. Boy, I mean, she's got to pretty much win out. I mean, she's obviously has to win Michigan. She has to win Wisconsin now, and then I mean, we're getting perilously close to Utah actually mattering in all this. I mean, remember
Nevada, Utah.
Yeah, I mean, well, in Utah you had your independent candidate Evan McMullin, who was actually doing pretty well. I mean, that's 6 electoral votes right there that could actually make a big difference. And that was, that was his argument all along, was to say, well, if it's close enough, we could be the thing that sends it over to the House of Representatives, and everybody just kind of laughed. But I mean, these electoral votes are getting hard to come by for Hillary Clinton. So,
well, North Carolina, I'm looking at the map here that the New York Times has put up, and Donald Trump, with 89% of the vote in, is leading in North Carolina with 51% of the vote to 46% to Clinton. Now, that's 11% of the vote still out. That isn't necessarily a ton. It depends on where that vote's coming from.
But to have 11% out and have to make up 5% within that 11%, it would almost be unheard of.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's...
So she might lose North Carolina, too.
So, yeah. So when we think of Trump's path, I mean, Florida...
That's it.
Florida, North Carolina, Ohio, and I mean, I'm flabbergasted. I mean, he's pulling off the inside straight that nobody really thought that he could, and yeah.
But Pennsylvania is still key here. If she holds Pennsylvania and wins Colorado, Nevada, and some of the western states, Utah, we don't think she's going to win there. But you're right. The McMullin question is
if he
could become important.
If he could keep Trump from getting 6 electoral votes and keep him down to, say, 269. I mean, you never know what could happen. So he's pretty close to becoming a household name, I think, maybe.
Right. So, Chris, what does it mean if Donald Trump wins and the Republicans hold the Senate as well? You could have a Republican control of all branches of government. It's possible.
It is possible.
I wouldn't have predicted this just a few days ago.
I wouldn't have predicted this at all, ever, and nor did I for the last year and a half. But yeah, so then you have, with your filibuster in the Senate, you'll have a handful of Democratic senators become essentially kind of like, the thing that stops everything from happening. So you'll have kind of like a super group of Democratic senators that'll be able to kind of dictate policy. And kind of almost become, if we have gridlock, they'll be the lock. I mean, they'll be the ones that'll be able to stop things. But then again, Trump will have the bully pulpit. He'll be able to kind of set the agenda. We know he's able to move people just based on rhetoric. So he's going to have that hammer in his hands. So yeah, and then Trump can kind of run roughshod over Paul Ryan for as long as he wants.
Well, as we talked earlier, Paul Ryan's job might be even tougher with a President Trump than a President Hillary Clinton.
Right.
Chris, stand by. We may want to come back to you. We're going to go now to a pre-taped segment that we did with Tom Kircher, looking at how PolitiFact rated the Senate candidates.
The final days of this campaign featured a wave of attacks from both sides, including in the U.S. Senate race. We're going to take a look at a few of those late claims now with Tom Kircher, one of our PolitiFact Wisconsin reporters. So, Tom, here's some claims we want to roll through just to remind voters of what they had been hearing and where the candidates and their backers came down.
Right.
So the first claim is from the group Americans United for Change, which said Ron Johnson calls Social Security a Ponzi scheme and wants to privatize the program, and that one was rated half true.
Yeah, Ponzi schemes are illegal, so what Johnson does is call Social Security a legal Ponzi scheme, trying to emphasize that the money comes from today's workers to pay today's retirees. He also has indicated some support for at least some privatization of Social Security, but it's not clear to what extent he wants to do that.
All right, this claim now is from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which says Russ Feingold said that with Obamacare we could keep our doctors and our plans, and it was rated as the lie of the year, and that was rated true.
Russ Feingold did make that statement during his 2010 re-election campaign, and in 2013, PolitiFact National rated that statement as the lie of the year. At that point, it was primarily attributed to President Obama, but others like Feingold made it as well.
All right, and this claim now is from Russ Feingold, who says Ron Johnson is benefiting from several super PACs, and I am not. And that was rated false.
Yeah, that's just not accurate. Both candidates have received money from super PACs, Johnson more so, but Feingold as well.
All right, and now a claim from Ron Johnson, who says prior to Obamacare here in Wisconsin, 95% of Wisconsinites were covered by insurance. After Obamacare, 95% of Wisconsinites were covered by insurance. It hasn't had an impact, and that was rated false.
Yeah, that suggests there's been no impact on people who were uninsured before, but that's just not the case. Depending on the survey you look at least 1 or 2 percentage points of improvement in terms of the number of Wisconsinites who have insurance since Obamacare as compared to before.
Right, and in that case, Ron Johnson was using an outdated number. That sort of measuring stick took in the transitional year before Obamacare was fully
That's
implemented.
Right. Yep.
Now a claim from Russ Feingold, who says Donald Trump and Ron Johnson oppose a women's right to choose, and Johnson voted against the Violence Against Women Act, and that was rated mostly true.
Mostly true because Trump and Johnson are anti-abortion. When it comes to the Violence Against Women Act, Johnson did vote against that particular bill, but it wasn't as though he was against domestic violence protections. He voted for some alternatives that he thought were better.
All right, and finally, one from the Wisconsin Republican Party that says Russ Feingold formed his own political group to pay himself and his staff millions, and that was rated half true.
This is a reference to Progressives United, the group that Feingold formed after he lost re-election in 2010. There was about $2 million spent. He collected some of that, also salaries to his staff members. Whether that was the intent in forming that group, no evidence of that specifically.
All right. Well, that's our discussion for this election. Another election in the books for PolitiFact Wisconsin. You can follow all of our work after this election and beyond at politifact.com/Wisconsin.
Okay.
Joined now
Nevada's
by
going to
Bice,
be
our
big.
Watchdog columnist who writes a lot about politics, and you've got some real news for us here at the top of the 10 o'clock hour. Tell us what's going on.
So Ron Johnson's won the race against Russ Feingold in a huge upset. As I said, 60 days ago, no one would have predicted this. 30 days ago, it would have been a stunning news to anybody. The Feingold campaign, obviously their numbers collapsed and Ron Johnson caught up. I was just told by a source, a Republican source, that Feingold has already called and conceded to Ron Johnson. So
let's talk about the historic nature of that. This is a huge, obviously Republicans are trying to hang on to the Senate, so this is a key seat they didn't necessarily count on.
And you know, earlier this year, people were saying that the most vulnerable senators were, number one, Kirk from Illinois.
Who's lost.
And number two, Ron Johnson, on every list around. And you can, as I've said earlier, you can find Mark Belling, you can find Charlie Sykes, you can find Republican pundits all saying a couple months ago that the race was done and over and Johnson had no way of winning. So
what is the failing, do you think, for Russ Feingold? Just old news? People didn't want to go back to someone that they were already rejected 6 years ago?
I've been
what do you
saying
think
for the last 3 or 4 months that Feingold had failed to provide a good reason to send him back for a fourth term. He didn't want to talk about a fourth term, but there wasn't a compelling reason for him to be there, other than that his opponent was beholden to corporate interests, and that he didn't make a good senator. But instead of just his critique of Ron Johnson, he didn't offer a very good motive for why people should go out and vote for him.
Right, so he didn't have much of a platform, so to speak. It was just sort of, I want my job back.
It was Russ Feingold. He wanted to continue doing the things that he did, but I think you have to give some credit to Ron Johnson. Ron Johnson turned things around by starting to run these very upbeat and positive ads. On TV, anytime you turn on TV, there was a lot of negative material going on. And then there was this sort of funny, jokey ad with him changing diapers. It was almost like he was using the same strategy that Feingold used in
24 years ago, right?
Yep. When he decided to break through a very negative race between Shikoda and Moody, and he comes through with the funny stuff, the lighthearted stuff. These weren't really funny, but they were more personable, to the point that someone that I know very well was watching this and were like, I think I like that guy. And I was like, you don't even know that guy. You're just watching TV commercials. But that was the impression that people got from it. Feingold's ads were not very personable, I don't think. He had one where he got a new van because he was driving around the state so much. But again, that's not a very compelling reason to go out and vote for him.
Yeah, well, let's take a look at some of the numbers now, and even the headlines from the Sagas. We jumped right into the news here. So this is the Senate race, and these numbers, of course, aren't final yet, but they show that lead for Ron Johnson with a very healthy over Russ Feingold, and it's been called by the networks, and Russ Feingold has conceded.
One thing to note, again, we had exit poll stuff that showed that Feingold was up 5 points, and so a lot of people were getting very excited about that. So it's a reminder that those things are not predictive, and that when people came in and started voting, and it's also true that Trump, that Johnson apparently outperformed Trump by a pretty good margin in the suburbs. So that was an important thing.
The next question is, what does it say if the exit polls were that off in that race? Is it potentially, are they off in the presidential contest?
But the exit poll numbers continue to come in. So by the end of the night, they might reflect what the actual result is. It's just that those were the numbers that were provided at 8 o'clock. We'll continue to get those numbers until
let's take a quick look here at some of the other numbers and electoral votes, how they're doing. Donald Trump now is at 197. Hillary Clinton at 131. We'll show that map in a minute. And let's see if we can show their totals here in Wisconsin, where it's still very close. This race has not been called, where Donald Trump is leading at 49% to Hillary Clinton's 46%. Historically in Wisconsin, Dane County and Milwaukee County often report late. Those would be very strong areas for Hillary Clinton. Let's look at this map now, where some of these states are starting to fill in, where this is even more up to date here, where Donald Trump has 201. And you'll see on that map that Florida has been called for Donald Trump. Colorado has been called for Hillary Clinton.
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania is still not called, but leading for Hillary Clinton. And there's a path, the Trump, had he lost Florida, he's basically done, right? Had he loses North Carolina, he'd basically be done.
And he has to win Michigan.
Right, he has to pick up one of these states: Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, Colorado, which they're showing for Clinton.
The newspaper, the Detroit Free Press, has already called Michigan for Hillary Clinton, but nobody else has. So it's interesting to see what happens there.
Okay, we're getting a note now that's saying that Feingold denies that he's conceded the race, but we do know that Fox News has called it for Ron Johnson.
Right.
Let's talk about. So your sourcer said that Ron Johnson
someone on the
received
Johnson side. Yeah,
right.
that's what they were They were actually texting me and telling me that. Okay.
All right. Well, we'll keep following that race and that story. But let's talk a little bit more on the presidential election and that level, where this is the next hour and a half here. We're going to see a lot of these states, turn completely one way or the other, and they will be called.
But the states to watch will be Michigan and here, obviously. Those will be the two states, because California, which is still out there, Oregon and Washington will all go for Hillary Clinton.
Right, and then you're talking about Alaska and Hawaii will come in very late, and there's small totals. So Michigan, Wisconsin are the ones to watch. Clearly, Pennsylvania does that hold for Hillary Clinton, and New Hampshire, which right now is showing with Trump in the lead there, and that's one of those states he absolutely has to pick off in order to win.
Right.
So Dan, talk a little bit about.
It looks like the night's going to end up being a 270
It's really right there. I mean,
right.
And then you're getting into these scenarios of states like Maine and I guess it's Nebraska that they break it down by congressional district.
Right.
You don't win all of. You can win
right.
the state, but not get the entire thing. And that gets that crazy scenario in Utah being the determining state if it didn't go one way or the other for those for Hillary or Clinton or Donald Trump. So you've been around politics for a long time.
So have you.
Yeah, I have too. But I mean, describe what as best as you can think of it. What are these? The aides, the close circles for them thinking right now, because there's nothing they can do.
Well, I think
right?
it's
All
a
they can do
roller
is
coaster
wait.
ride, because I think everybody coming in yesterday thought that this was going to be Hillary Clinton. I mean, what numbers were you hearing? I was hearing people predicting 320, 290, and the most conservative was 270 electoral votes for her, and most people were dismissing that. So I think most of the aides and stuff came in thinking that. Came in thinking this was pretty much a done deal because, polling has become so precise, but clearly that's not happened. It's been a roller coaster ride tonight. Some of these races have not turned out the way that people expected. So, the Democrats came in feeling pretty good. The Republicans then, have taken some control, and the fact that it's 10 o'clock now and we have no idea who's going to win is a huge win for Donald Trump.
Right, yeah. Well, if we think back to our politics show just last week, we're talking about, Anthony Weiner being the determining factor in this race because, Hillary Clinton had a lot more momentum that sort of shifted at that point, and was she able to get it back?
And some of the exit polling was showing that, that issue didn't influence a lot of voters. But again, do we trust the exit polling on some of this stuff? But yeah, obviously, but she's been ahead in almost every poll up until this point. So, and there are some now saying that there's a possibility she wins the overall vote total, but she doesn't win the electoral college.
Right, that would be the replay of 2000 where, Al Gore and George
And if
W.
we're lucky,
Bush.
we could spend another month going over this stuff and get the Supreme Court involved. Get a 4-4 vote.
4-4 vote. It'll go back. They'll look very wise to have not approved that nominee if that's where it winds up. Yeah. Well, let's do this. Let's try to take a step back, get our viewers caught up on those numbers. We're going to go back from the top, and then we're going to have James Causey and Christian Schneider join us to talk a little bit more about the results. So let's talk again about the electoral votes. Where there Donald Trump, according to this tally, has 201 to Hillary Clinton's 197. Now, this is, a lot of these are not yet final, but, we're certainly monitoring them closely. And let's look now at how their totals, at some of the state totals, which we'll see here on the presidential race, of how they're faring so far. And there you can see, there's many precincts still to come in. Donald Trump here in Wisconsin has an edge on Hillary Clinton, 49% to 46%. Again, Madison and Milwaukee often are the latest of the states to come in. Let's look at the Senate contest, where earlier we had been told on the sources on the Republican side that Ron Johnson, the former U.S. Senator, had conceded to Russ Feingold, the former senator, had conceded to Ron Johnson. Feingold is now saying he has not conceded, but that race looks to be exceedingly tight, and Ron Johnson is doing well there and outperforming Russ Feingold. Let's look, too, at the 8th Congressional District, which is up in the Green Bay area. That, again, is the only open congressional seat here in Wisconsin, where there Mike Gallagher appears to be comfortably ahead of Tom Nelson, the Democrat. This is the open seat, and this is an area where Donald Trump was expected to do very well, so that would be reflected here in these totals. And then let's set the table again, looking at the national map of where the current states look, where they're called. Red, of course, is Republican. You have to look at the dark red versus the light red, which are the who's leading at the moment, and the key states that have fallen in there, of course, are Virginia, which was Hillary Clinton was counting on, Florida, which Donald Trump absolutely needed, North Carolina is still out, Michigan and Wisconsin are ones to watch. Pennsylvania, Hillary Clinton, of course, desperately needs that to stay on her side of the equation. New Hampshire is very important. And then states like Nevada and others out west. So, again, in the next hour to hour and a half, we should have a lot better picture of who the next president is. Right now, there's a lot of nervous folks, and we're going to bring in, James and Christian, who were here earlier writing their headlines. I'm going to give you the first correct? Does anyone want to revise that headline we just wrote?
I'm taking my hat off.
James has his hat off. He's
tossing it.
Okay.
Man.
What's your sense of what's going on out there?
Boy, major surprise in the Feingold race. I did not expect this. It follows up to what Dan Bice said earlier. Russ Feingold did not do a good job on explaining why he should take this position away from Ron Johnson, and it just didn't come across clear. Ron Johnson had really great commercials. They were kind of corny, but he did a good job on explaining who he was, and he showed some personality, something that he didn't do the first time around. So I'm very surprised.
All right, are you ready to go with that conservative commentator eats hat headline for
as writers, we usually get the chance to sit down and think about what we're writing and put this all in context. So it's kind of hard now, as this is all going on, to try. But this is a night that you have to start thinking about in historic context. Context. For Russ Feingold to lose this race, as I said, it's been 36 years. After he had a huge lead, we are in historic territory now. For Feingold to lose this race, it is absolutely catastrophic. He had everything going for him, and yet somehow still lost. With a month left, Ron Johnson starts all of his ads, and Feingold kind of takes his foot off the gas, gets caught flat-footed, and then he loses. This is going to be something that we're talking about for decades. Kind of what happened here, and and Trump too. It's just trying to react in real time. I almost feel like a boxer has been punched in the head.
We'll give you another little blow here, not necessarily a blow, but North Carolina has been called now for Trump. So that's one of those states that we were just talking about as being so important for Donald Trump to hang on to. And we're seeing the results here in the 8th Congressional District, which we saw earlier, Mike Gallagher leading Tom Nelson, but let's talk more on the presidential contest here. That's one of those states. If Democrats woke up this morning, they said, "Well, look, Donald Trump has to run the perfect map to get there." Right. He's running the map so far. The firewall becomes Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, some of these other states where Clinton would still be able to hold on and win.
It's funny, the entire election we've been sitting around talking about how the Republicans are the party of disarray, the party that they can't, they couldn't choose who was going to be the anti-Trump, and so Trump walks through, and then they end up with the worst candidate of all time. But in fact...
Well, was he the worst candidate of all time?
I know.
He's performing better than Mitt Romney did, right? And than some of the other ones.
But that's kind of the narrative. It might actually have been the Dems all along. It was the Dems all along that were the party in disarray. Because, this is a catastrophe for them tonight. To lose Ron Johnson, they're losing... They picked up the Mark Kirk seat in Illinois. But, Rubio and to lose... Todd Young, or to win Todd Young in Indiana, we're going to have a Republican Senate, I think. This is just, I honestly can't believe what's happening right now.
Yeah. Well, we talked earlier about how the both sides nominated candidates with so much baggage and troubles, and you're right, the conventional wisdom had been, look, if the Republicans had just nominated anyone else, they'd have been able to easily beat Hillary Clinton. This was the conventional wisdom here. What if the Democrats had nominated someone else? It was Hillary Clinton's turn. She had all these huge advantages. What if, say, Joe Biden had been a candidate,
or
if Bernie Sanders had come through? Would we have a different dynamic, James?
It's hard to say. Judging by what's going on tonight, it's really hard to understand if Bernie Sanders or anyone else would have fared any better. He's proven to have a lot of will and he's made of Teflon to survive all that he survived, because just think, 4 weeks ago, everybody thought he was done, after the comments came out, but now look at him. This is a surprise. But think about Hillary Clinton. She lost to a young black candidate years ago, President Barack Obama. Then she had a tough time with a man who's her senior, in Bernie Sanders. If she loses tonight, oh my God.
Yeah.
Can you imagine?
I'm thinking of, as we said earlier, I was talking with Dan, if you're the inner circle, there's nothing you can do right now, right? You can't influence the results anymore.
No.
It's not like you can just get a few more people to the polls in California because that's going where it's going. You just have to sit back and watch. So how painful and agonizing is that, do you think, Christian?
Just to sit back and watch, and there's nothing that you can do. I can imagine it's just the most helpless feeling in the world. I've been in campaign rooms where that's happened, and you have to take your candidate and just say, there's nothing you could do and make them feel better. But man, this is, there's also the flip side. I mean, the people that ran the Ron Johnson campaign did a masterful job, and they are going to dine out on this for a long time. Mm-hmm. I mean, much like the people that you saw who ran the Scott Walker recall election, suddenly the national people came calling and they became big stars and started running things nationally. I think, if you're any candidate in America, you might want to take a look at what Ron Johnson did in this campaign and start plucking up some of his people.
I mean, how many points did he make up?
Oh, I mean,
he was down 7-8 points, wasn't he?
I mean, that's
some
amazing.
polls had him double digits a month ago.
That's absolutely amazing.
Yeah. He's got closing speed. He's got that Usain Bolt speed.
That's good.
Well, let's talk back on the presidential side, because earlier in the evening and for the past weeks and days, people were talking about the historic nature of this election for Hillary Clinton. If she were to win, you'd have if the first woman president.
240
now, if
years.
she's to lose to a person who has made all sorts of controversial comments about women, who has been slammed for that, has made these remarks. And, I mean, what does that say? Where does that put, James, in your mind, the average Democrat, or especially the movement and people who are looking at this, to go from that close to saying, well, potentially, you lost. You didn't just lose, you lost to Donald Trump.
Yeah, I think what this says to Democrats is that, man, we have to do a lot of soul searching and really, really pick the best candidate and not try to go for being the first woman or first this or first that, but just finding out the best candidate possible. Hillary had a lot of baggage, but we went with her anyway, or Democrats went with her anyway, and that's, I don't know if you could do that, and this will tell if we could continue to go that route.
Okay. Now, I want to ask you, Christian, on this one, to follow up on that idea that, if, let's play out the scenario, it looks to be that with the Johnson victory, and we've been told that former Senator Feingold has now conceded that he conceded, so so we got that out of the way. There was no bad information on this show. It was the conceit of not conceding that you conceded.
To call to concede.
Right. There's something. It goes around. But in the scenario being, okay, if Republicans control the House and the Senate, and Trump manages to pull it off, I mean, that's was unfathomable before, but what's the dynamic there? Because, a lot of the Republicans aren't necessarily in line with what Donald Trump's proposing. Can the House and the Senate serve as a break to that? And does that give someone like Paul Ryan even more influence?
It gives him a lot more headaches, I think, because as I said earlier in the show, now he's got to answer for everything that Trump says or does, every ridiculous comment that he makes. There may still be some stuff in his past that we don't know about that he's going to have to answer for. And so, yeah, I mean, now Paul Ryan essentially becomes like, he has to carry that bucket of water no matter how heavy it is. And so I think it makes it difficult for him. And then, with a Republican Senate, as I said, there's going to be just a handful of Democratic senators that kind of now run the show with the filibuster. Who can kind of give the thumbs up or down on legislation and block the quote-unquote Trump agenda, which we don't even really know what that is at this point. So,
yeah, I mean, that agenda's been kind of a moving target, to be charitable about it.
Yeah,
I mean,
we don't really know what we're electing here. If he ends up winning,
well, we know part of it. He's going to build a wall, supposedly.
The wall's built.
But he's also said, "Well, I'm not really doing that."
Wall right now. Where do I pay?
Wow. When you talk about headaches that it will create for Paul Ryan, think about it. Paul Ryan didn't really want this. This was sort of bestowed on him. He was just sort of forced into this. And now we see why he didn't want this. Why would you want to deal with something like a Trumponaut? Something that big and powerful that you have to fight all the time. You know,
is that like an Argonaut or something?
Yeah,
or,
I'm trying to create a word.
Power Ranger.
I'm trying
or
to create a word for what
okay,
he
we're going to
is.
get a copyright in for you on that, James. No, Trump or not?
Yeah.
Not, okay.
You know, you know, is this something that he wanted to sign up for? Is a question, and it'll be tough to try to manage someone like him. But it's still too early to call it. But this is a big if. I still think Hillary could pull this off. But
Christian, we're not going to let you get out of this segment without, creating a new word for us right now. So can you top Trump or not?
I've got a lot of words, but I don't think you could say them on. Of course, this is on the internet, so
it's kind of on.
It would be a combination of a lot of things that I probably couldn't say, but yeah, I mean, it's unbelievable. It's historic.
Very historic.
And so for people of the future that are watching this live stream archived, this is a crazy night, guys.
Yeah, and this is where the word Trump-o-naut was coined by this man right here, James Causey. So before we move on, let's take another quick look at the results that we have so far and where things stand. Here we show the electoral votes, 270 needed to win, the magic number. Donald Trump at 216, Hillary Clinton at 197. Let's see what they have here in the state of Wisconsin right now. Where those numbers are pretty similar to what we saw earlier, 49% to 46%. And let's see the Senate numbers now to show you where that race is coming together. Or, Ron Johnson has topped, the million mark, or is a significant threshold there, 52% to Russ Feingold's 45%. Let's also give you a quick look at the 8th Congressional District, where the Republican there is, pretty far ahead of the Democrat Tom Nelson. And finally, let's look at that map again as some more states have filled in. So one reason for Clinton's big jump is California and Oregon have been called for her. Many of the other states that we were watching, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, Wisconsin, Michigan, obviously, and states like Nevada, Washington State are still out there to be determined. So before we move on now, we're going to go to a taped segment from earlier today on some of the voters at the polls and what they had to say, talking to our reporters as we were out here on Election Day getting the pulse of the people.
So tell me what your thoughts were going into the voting booth today.
My thoughts was that I'm going to make my vote count for the right person that cares about us and the United States.
What kind of message do you want to send out to folks now about voting?
If you care about where you live, come and vote. If you really, really want the United States to be what it's supposed to be, vote.
I just went in and let the Holy Spirit lead me as who I should check off.
Did you know before you came here who you were going to vote for?
Not really. I was undecided, but the Lord took care of that.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
And how was the experience itself, the mechanics of voting?
Everything was good. Everything went really smooth. I didn't have to wait or anything. Went right in, voting came right out.
My name is Lorenzo. I came and voted today. This is my first time voting. Pretty nice experience. It was quick and easy. I'm glad I voted today. Got my input on who I want to be president.
Were you pleased with the candidates that you had to choose from today?
No, not really. But got to choose one. Somebody has to win.
What were your thoughts going in the polling booth today?
Oh, excellent. I mean, I went in there with an open mind, and I came out with the right vote, I believe, for myself, and I hope everybody else will have the same opinion.
Do you think it's important to vote?
Oh yeah, very, very much. I mean, that's where we get our people in office and things that we need to get done in life.
What are your thoughts today as you're going in to vote?
Looking for a change. Big change.
Big change. Insurance.
Healthcare.
Yes. Disability.
Education.
Just the world in general.
Yeah.
Change in the world.
Why is it important to vote in your view?
It's your right.
Your right, and to voice your opinion.
Your opinion. If you don't vote, you have no opinion.
I'm David Haynes, the opinions editor at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel on quite an election night. I'm here with Dan Bice.
It's not going to be over soon.
And it's certainly not over yet, although it is over for apparently Russ Feingold. Let's look at the headlines first, and then we'll chat about that. Ron Johnson has won re-election. A pretty stunning comeback for Ron Johnson in defeating Russ Feingold, who is now conceded. Donald Trump has won Florida. He's also won Ohio and a number of other states. Hillary Clinton, though, has won Virginia and a number of other states that were too close to call. He now has won North Carolina. We'll take that off the too close to call list. But Pennsylvania, Michigan, and yes, Wisconsin, not yet ready to call. Also, Gallagher has won the open house seat in the 8th Congressional District, defeating Tom Nelson. Now, Dan, let's go to you. Let's talk about the Senate race.
Pretty incredible.
Unbelievable.
It wasn't so long ago that Ron Johnson was down 12 points in the polling, and things, turned in the last 2 months. The Republican establishment moved out, assuming that this race was over, and Ron Johnson started doing his own ads.
They left him for dead.
They did, and there was a period in August when Johnson went off the air and there was nobody else advertising for him. Mm-hmm. And some people think that, Russ Feingold should have moved in for the kill at that point.
Yeah.
But, I think it's not just a criticism of Feingold, which, I have been saying repeatedly that Feingold didn't give a very compelling reason to send him to Congress for a 4th term. But I think Ron Johnson did a good thing, that his ads end up breaking through during this onslaught of negative TV spots when he does some lighthearted ads. And, he can do that because under Citizens United, these outside groups could run the attack ads while he ran these positive spots about himself.
Yeah, and he still had this curious sort of situation where he's been a senator for 6 years, but he wasn't that well known, so he could still paint his own canvas.
He was not very well known.
Yeah.
When this race started going, and even a year into this race, a third of Wisconsin voters still said that they still didn't know him well enough to have an opinion about him. And at certain points in this race, it seemed as if he would have been just as happy to lose as to win. And that drives the aides nuts because they want someone to run scared. And he wasn't running scared. Yeah. But, it seemed to me about 2 months ago that he made the decision, I really want this thing. And so he started running like he hadn't run before.
Well, we saw it at the editorial board meeting. You were there,
right.
And you asked the question about what that got him going. And I've never seen him as passionate as I did then. So it was clear to me at that point he was running hard.
Right. I mean, in fact, there was one point when we were talking about his not winning, and he said jokingly, well, that might be the preferred outcome. But I don't think he really believed that, but I think he'd be happy to go back to Oshkosh and run his company again. Whereas I think Russ Feingold wanted to be a senator and wanted another 6 years at least. Yeah. This will be only the second term for Ron Johnson and his final term. He has said he won't run again.
Right.
But what it means is the House obviously stays in Republican hands, and the Senate, it appears, will remain in Republican hands.
It sure looks like it now, based on what we know.
Yeah, earlier in the night, there was a story that circulated that Joe Manchin from West Virginia might switch parties from being Democrat to Republican, but his aides are now saying that that's not the case, that he'll be a Democrat till the day he died. And so, I was actually in West Virginia when he grew up, and knew his uncle, knew his brother, knew everybody, his cousin, all of them Democrats. I didn't think that was going to happen.
Yeah.
But it's a pretty amazing outcome here.
It really is. So Russ Feingold, what's next for Russ Feingold?
He can do what he was doing before. He's been a part-time professor talking to politics. He taught at Marquette University, Lawrence University, and at Stanford, but he wasn't making a lot of money off of it. I wrote a story just on Sunday about the income for both candidates, and Ron Johnson's worth somewhere between $36 and $60 million. Russ Feingold's worth between $500,000 and $800,000, and if you take his wife's holdings out of it, he's worth somewhere between negative $10,000 and $50,000. So, sort of like in our ballpark.
Right. Yeah, definitely in mine.
But it was two candidates who wanted to be senator, but you sort of got the sense that one of them needed to be senator. So I don't know. I'm sure his retirement will kick in soon, and he'll be fine. I don't think he'll ever run for office again.
Well, that's why I really meant politically. Is there anything left for Russ Feingold?
He's what, 61? Yeah. I don't really think so. I mean, the next seat that opens up will be Tammy Baldwin's. No one's really on the Democratic side is going to challenge her. There'll be a huge field, I think, on the Republican side. But yeah, I don't see him running for office again. I mean, this is a stunning. Even 2 weeks ago,
it really is.
2 weeks ago, I'd written that I think that even his staff wouldn't expect him to win, and that they would be happy if the race was close.
Did Ron Johnson lead in any poll that you saw?
There were a couple of polls by the Super PAC that was supporting him that put out polls saying that he was up. But I think it's one of those things where, he did, because of his ads, he broke through. Some people responded, and you could see in the polling that early on, Feingold had the support of the independents, and over time, that support slipped away. And by the last Marquette poll, the independents had shifted toward Johnson, and I think that trend continued. It reminds me so much of the 1992 race, where there was a lot of negative ads. Feingold breaks through with these clever, sort of funny ads, and in the last week, the numbers just moved in his direction. Right now, the numbers show that Johnson's up like 6 or 7 points, which, is pretty amazing. And we were just talking to him a few minutes ago, and he said that even he was surprised by the margin.
Well, Trump seems to be running better in Wisconsin, though, than expected, too.
He is. So, yeah. I mean, Hillary Clinton's never done well here. She lost big time to Barack Obama. She lost in the primary this year.
Primary to Bernie.
Yeah, and so she's the people of Wisconsin have not embraced her. Obama still has a 54% approval rating. Yeah. So people of Wisconsin have not embraced Hillary Clinton like they did her predecessor. But it would be an upset there if he wins as well. But in some of these counties, Waukesha County, Johnson was outpacing Trump. So yeah. It's not. This night is not turning out the way most pundits, most pollsters, and certainly the way most Democrats expected.
Yeah. So, are we going to have to keep an eye on the pollsters over the next 24 hours to make sure they're okay?
Well, I think there's that. Plus, I'm guessing that there probably were some. I took classes in graduate school on polling, and there's some things that you can't really trust people to offer their honest opinions about. And, it's possible that there are some Trump supporters who didn't want to acknowledge that, or, there's a great deal of questioning of the establishment by the Trump supporters, and it's possible that many of them, weren't exactly, truthful about who they were going to support.
Let's talk about Hillary Clinton's path here.
Yeah.
Trump has virtually run the table on the states that he needed to win. And we're looking at the map right now. We don't have it up on the screen there, but we'll talk about it. Trump has won Florida. He's won Ohio. He's won North Carolina. Michigan is still out.
And as we said earlier, the Free Press there said that Hillary Clinton's going to win, but nobody else has called it.
Nobody else has called it. Apparently, Fox News has just called Wisconsin and Iowa for Donald Trump. So those, Wisconsin, I think, is a surprise. Iowa, not so much.
Wisconsin's a surprise. It's a surprise given, one, that Trump performed very poorly in the primary.
Get whomped by Ted Cruz.
And he severely underperformed in this area. But, I've been told all night that the turnout in Waukesha, Ozaukee, and Washington counties outperformed 2012. Yeah. And if they did actually come out and vote for both Johnson and Trump, then, that would have been a big part of it. The second thing is the turnout in Green Bay, and we just said Gallagher won. Yeah. So you can assume that many of the Gallagher voters were Trump supporters as well. So those two areas. And the Democrats have been emphasizing that the Milwaukee turnout and the Dane County turnout was going to be really good. But it turned out that the numbers weren't quite as significant as we were being led to believe.
So let's go across the rest of the country. Clinton has won Illinois. She's likely to win Minnesota. Pennsylvania is a firewall state,
Right.
and she's still ahead. If in the latest I saw, but it's not by much. It's a whisker.
And she won Virginia.
She's ahead by a point with almost 80% of the vote in Pennsylvania. Colorado is likely to go her way. New Mexico is likely to go her way.
California,
Nevada,
Oregon, and Washington.
California, Oregon, Washington will definitely go her way, and then that leaves Nevada. It could come down to Nevada.
Yeah, I mean, it's,
Where you've got
it's
a
a
tight
pretty
race.
incredible night.
Harry Reid isn't running, and that's a tight race with a Republican that disavowed Trump and then reavowed him, and so we could be here for a while.
We could be here for a while. I mean, the possibilities are still amazing. We could have a one-party capital in terms of.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if Trump wins the presidency, the Senate remains Republican, the House remains Republican, and Trump would then be selecting the next Supreme Court justices. So
and the 5-4 majority would continue, and it might become a much larger majority. Given
I would guess that if Hillary Clinton wins, the best prediction would be some form of gridlock.
Yeah,
because. Will the Senate approve her Supreme Court nomination? But, I don't think Hillary Clinton's folks were expecting
Here's the thing about Donald Trump, though. If he wins, and the Republicans do retain control of the Senate and the House, I don't think we know what Trump is. I don't think we know what he would do.
No. I mean, some people were saying that, that we knew one thing for certain, and that is that a New York liberal was going to win this race. So I don't know
what he is.
Does he know what he is?
I'm not sure. So then it gets down to who's he going to have around him.
Right.
What power do the congressional leaders have to shape what he wants to do? He hasn't proved to be very shapeable.
Well, not just that. I mean, the other thing that's interesting is
up to now.
The Democratic Party and Hillary Clinton used very traditional methods to get out the vote.
Yeah.
And they were knocking on hundreds of thousands of doors this past weekend in Wisconsin. And Trump didn't have that. He relied on the force of his celebrity and his personality to get the people out there.
And social media.
And, Hillary Clinton did not come here during the general election.
Yeah.
And, she might end up paying a price for that.
Yeah, I think it's likely she's going to pay a price. Although we don't know what's going to happen. We still have a long way to go here tonight. We are going to go now to a tape that we made earlier that looks at the challenges that we just talked about that Paul Ryan may face in the next session of Congress. Wow. I'm David Haynes, and I'm with Craig Gilbert of our Washington Bureau. So aside from Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, there's one man who has as much at stake tonight as they do, and that's Paul Ryan. So what is at stake, and what might his reaction be?
So the biggest thing is the Republican Party's majority in the House, which is the reason why he's our speaker. Democrats have to gain 30 seats. There aren't a lot of competitive seats these days because of redistricting and because of the geography of where people live. Republicans have a real advantage on the map, on the playing field. So even in a year when Democrats may have a better night at the top of the ticket, most people don't expect them to take back the House. So the question is, if Paul Ryan has a smaller margin coming out than he had going in theory, that makes it harder for him to manage his own caucus, and he's also engendered some ill will from the kind of more militant conservatives in his caucus.
Isn't there something about the composition of that caucus that could change, though, too?
Yeah, so if the seats that are most likely to go down are in these kind of suburban battleground districts, they're more moderate, so he could lose some of his kind of moderate supporters in the Republican caucus. He still has, clearly pretty lopsided support within the caucus. And the problem for the people that want to get rid of him as speaker is they don't really have an alternative candidate that they can sell the caucus on. Right. They're looking for some concessions. But there's also just some bitterness and some anger and irritation on the part of some conservatives in the House who feel like Ryan hasn't been supportive enough of Trump. And this is one of those cases where Ryan is getting it from both sides. He's getting it from the anti-Trump people who think it's just beyond the pale for him to have supported Trump at all, and he's getting it from the pro-Trump people who think he hasn't been a good soldier.
Well, he said he wouldn't campaign with him, and then last weekend he was supposed to, and then it didn't happen, and so... a strained relationship, to say the least. Is his speakership vulnerable?
Well, I think my expectation is he'll be reelected Speaker. What's going to happen is after the election, in that first week, there'll be an internal process within the Republican caucus or conference, and they'll make a decision about who their candidate for the speakership is. The Speaker isn't elected or reelected until January when the new House meets, and he needs a majority of the vote. So if he has the Republican votes and the Republicans are the majority, he becomes the Speaker. There are some crazy things that could happen under that scenario if some Republicans want to withhold their votes for him. But, you know, it's not just the House majority that's at stake. It's also his sort of political national future as a potential presidential candidate and his leadership in the party. We have a party that seems to be sort of split right now, maybe between a Ryan wing and a Trump wing. And so going forward, he's got to deal with the baggage of this very divisive election internally and his rift, on again, off again rift with Trump, which has even cost him some support in his home state, where he remains pretty popular and pretty popular among Republicans, but not as popular as he was before he tangled with Donald Trump.
So there's been some speculation that he might leave the speakership, that he might be in a better position to run for president. Do you think that's the case? I mean, could he possibly go back to Ways and Means?
He could. I mean, he has been pretty adamant that he's going to seek re-election for the speakership. Now, there may be a scenario where if conditions are imposed upon him and he's asked to take on a weaker speakership, then that's something he might walk away from. And it's something he threatened to walk away from when he was originally elected as Speaker. So that is a possible scenario. The other question is if, assuming he's re-elected as Speaker, you know, one key is going to be whether the Senate is in Democratic or Republican hands. If it's in Democratic hands and he's the only bulwark against the Democrats, he's under tremendous pressure. And all the pressure is on him because he's the only one with any power, the only Republican with any power. So he's going to be faced with the choice of cutting deals with the Democrats, which is anathema to a lot of Republicans, or maybe just letting the government grind to a halt, which comes with its own fallout. You know, if it was a rough job before, it's going to be even a rougher job moving forward.
Well, he's never struck me as someone who wants the government to grind to a halt. He
no,
seems to
that
be
hasn't
the kind
been
of guy who wants to get something done.
That hasn't been his history, but the problem is you end up paying a higher price for that in this new world where the party has been kind of made, it's a more militant party. You have the Trump effect. And then again, if he's the only guy they got, the Republican base is mad enough at Republicans in Washington already. If they feel like they're not doing enough to stop the Democrats, if the Democrats are in the White House and in the Senate, then a lot of that falls on Paul Ryan.
All right. Craig, thanks so much.
Great.
I'm David Haynes, and I'm back now with Mary Spicuzza, and Mary covers City Hall for us and a lot of other things, especially tonight. Mary, an extraordinary night.
Yeah, I think probably no one is more surprised than Russ Feingold, who led in pretty much every poll that I can remember, certainly every Marquette poll.
Yeah, we just had Dan on it. I can't remember a poll that,
I think there were some
major poll.
That, I think there were some partisan polls that showed him maybe ahead or neck and neck. But yeah, really from the beginning, although we did see Ron Johnson really closing in on him towards the end, and there was a barrage of ads. Ron Johnson was doing positive ads. He was doing attack ads. Others were attacking Feingold from third-party groups. So yeah, there was certainly a ton of spending coming in, but I think this is pretty stunning considering the polling advantage he had, and it seems to indicate that Republicans are going to keep control of the Senate. So.
Yeah, it sure looks that way. USA Today just called that, in fact, that the Republicans would retain control of the Senate. Now let's look at the map that we have up on the screen here now. And again, let's go over the states that the candidates have won. The key states for Trump: Florida, Ohio, North Carolina.
Right.
Hillary Clinton won West Virginia. She's leading by a whisker in Pennsylvania. If she loses Pennsylvania, I would venture to say she's in big trouble.
Yes.
That's a firewall state.
I'd say so.
She has apparently won Colorado. New Mexico is looking good for her. Nevada could be a key state. She will win the West Coast.
She won Washington State, as everybody expected.
Yeah. So the headlines right now, we'll take a look at those. In Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Nevada, still too close to call, although at least one network has called Wisconsin for Trump.
Fox News called
Fox
it.
News.
Mm-hmm.
That was just a little while ago.
Right. So I think obviously that is also surprising considering we really we haven't seen Hillary Clinton here in months. You would think if they were seeing trouble for her, she would have come for a visit or two, maybe would have sent President Obama or Michelle Obama, who obviously is extremely popular among Democrats here, to try to kind of rally the base, get out voters.
It's really surprising. It's like they didn't see it coming. And it makes you wonder, this happens after every election to a certain degree, but a lot of self-reflection due for the pollsters this time around?
I think so. I think that also...
And for us as journalists, maybe, that believe them?
Sure. I'm luckily not a pundit as much as I am a reporter, so I feel like I just report on this
Present
stuff.
company excluded.
Right. But you know, I think that a lot of people are surprised, and especially with Russ Feingold losing, again, if he was in trouble, the Marquette poll, the most recent one, did show a very, very tight race, razor-thin margin. Why wasn't Hillary coming? Why wasn't President Obama coming? Why wasn't Michelle Obama coming? I think that Democrats will be asking themselves those questions. Even if Hillary is able to pull out a win in Wisconsin, I think the fact that Russ Feingold was so crucial to a Democratic-controlled Senate. Obviously we saw Joe Biden, we saw Bernie Sanders, but certainly there could have been more high-profile surrogates coming in to try to help Russ Feingold drive up the vote, and that didn't happen in the final days, which would make us think that their internal polling was showing that he had a far greater lead than maybe he really did.
Right.
So.
Right. It makes you wonder. Well, this election, for all kinds of reasons, is going to be studied for years to come.
Yeah, and if Trump is the first Republican to win Wisconsin since Ronald Reagan in 1984. That is also shocking considering he was not particularly popular here. He did not win the primary. It's not like, Paul Ryan was on the ticket 4 years ago and they didn't win Wisconsin even then. So,
right.
Yeah.
Right. He, in fact, lost a primary by double digits to Ted Cruz back in April. He didn't have the support of Paul Ryan, even though Paul Ryan theoretically endorsed him. He wouldn't campaign with him.
And did not say his name much.
After the name that must not be uttered.
Right, especially after the Access Hollywood tape when
yes.
Speaker Ryan said that he would not defend him nor campaign with him, said he was sickened by what he heard. Yeah. Obviously we wrote a lot about the divisions in the party, and I think Speaker Ryan was at the epicenter of that. So it's interesting. Maybe that message to come home to Republican voters in the Wild Counties and around the state really sunk in.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I've been to 3 Trump rallies since January, and
I think me too.
Talked to a bunch of people there, and what I heard over and over was a deep sense of frustration with the government and with their own party. And the 3 words I heard over and over again were "shake it up." And so they saw Donald Trump as a messenger for that. And, all the things that you might have expected could derail him. We talked about Access Hollywood tape, you name it. They weren't too bothered by any of that.
I think part of it was also he really, he's obviously benefited from the media during his time
no doubt.
In New York, during his time with The Apprentice. But then he also was very good at basically criticizing the media, saying that he was being attacked, criticizing journalists, sometimes particular journalists by name. And I think that really sunk in with a lot of his supporters who felt like whatever is reported against him or reported about him was basically an attack on him.
Inoculated him. And journalism as an institution is not particularly well regarded right now, no matter what we might think about it. That's a pretty popular thing to do if you're running for office.
Sure, right. And I think among his supporters, a lot of them first-time voters, people who are not typically in the political, world normally. And I think that there was definitely a difference between covering maybe a Donald Trump rally versus a Paul Ryan rally in terms of the voters and how engaged they normally are. And I think we saw a lot of people who have not been as involved at Trump rallies.
Well, and no doubt, and what we appear to be seeing tonight, we'll see how it plays out. This isn't over yet. But what we appear to be seeing tonight are very engaged voters supporting Donald Trump. You know, he was fond of saying at his rallies, look at these rallies, look how many people show up. And they didn't come out to support him in Wisconsin, but they apparently have tonight all across the country.
And I think that there were a number of, even some of the never Trumpers who I talked to, who vowed that they would never vote for Trump when it came time to filling in the circle on the ballot. They couldn't bring themselves to fill in for Hillary Clinton or for somebody who would help her win. And so I think in the end that we probably saw some never Trumpers who were, you know, quietly filling in that circle.
Mm-hmm. Mary, thanks so much. Thanks. So we're going to take a break now. And we will be back every half hour with an update. We'll keep you up to date on how the national race is going and on what else we can tell you about the Wisconsin results. So come back to JS Online on the half hour for updates from here on in. Thanks so much.
All right, thanks for joining us again this evening as we go through the election results, give you the latest news on what's happening here in Wisconsin in this momentous presidential and Senate and other election night. So let's start with our headlines from the evening so far.
And crazy.
Throw your own, insert your own adjective here. So the headlines right now are Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada are still too close to call, though a few outlets have called Wisconsin for Donald Trump. The Republicans are going to hold the Wisconsin legislature, which is not unexpected, but maybe unexpected is by how much. They may be picking up a couple seats. And the Republicans are on track to keep hold of the U.S. Senate. So let's look at some of the specific race results here. We'll start with the electoral votes so far. And here we're showing Donald Trump with 244, Hillary Clinton with 209. So Donald Trump is on the precipice. And earlier today we talked about the path that Donald Trump needed to draw to that perfect straight. Now it's Hillary Clinton who has to in order to pull this one out. Here's where they stand in the state of Wisconsin. A pretty close race there with Trump at 49%, Hillary Clinton at 45%. Let's look at the U.S. Senate totals where that has been called for Ron Johnson earlier tonight. Right now it shows a 52% to 45% margin. And finally, the 8th Congressional District, where Gallagher has held a strong lead on Tom Nelson all evening. And finally, let's look at the most recent electoral map from USA Today, showing us what's called and what's outstanding. So if you look at the states that are in the lighter shades, those are the ones where Hillary Clinton now pretty well has to pull them all off, including coming from behind here in Wisconsin and Michigan, somehow getting Arizona, somehow getting New Hampshire, and that would, by the calculations, put her over the top. But that seems less likely, certainly, than it did at the start of the evening. Bill Glauber and Dan Bice, let's talk a little bit about the results starting at the presidential level. Is this election over?
It's not over. There's still a very narrow path for Clinton. It reminds me, I'm old enough to remember 1980, being in a newsroom then, amazed when Reagan sort of just, swept the country. This is not going to be a sweeping win by any means for either candidate, but it has that 1980 vibe to me.
Yeah, what do you think, Dan? Is this, the paths are narrowing. It's the flip side of where we started the evening.
The only difference is, in that race, we know that Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter knew what the results were going to be. I don't think Hillary Clinton knew that she might lose today. I think very few of us thought that she was going to lose today. The pollsters, the pundits, and the Dems were convinced that this was going to be the night for Hillary Clinton.
Well, she did not even make one appearance in this state during the general election.
She hasn't made an appearance here. The last time she was here was March 30th.
A few weeks ago, Donald Trump didn't necessarily think he was going to win either, right? He's saying it's a rigged election. They're all against me. Everything switches a little bit with the FBI announcing, well, now we're going to go back
TV and everything. And now he's got to pull the plug.
Now he's got his own
administration.
Right? Yeah.
Oh my God.
But what is it? Say, I guess, assuming he's going to win this thing, about the country and where we are right now. Clearly very divided. People don't like each other.
Pollsters are terrible, or people lie a lot to pollsters. It's one or the other because the numbers were pretty much wrong everywhere. To see the New York Times go from saying that Hillary Clinton had a 90% chance of being president 2 days ago to right now they're saying there's a 95% chance that Trump's going to be president that's just incredible. None of us would have predicted that. I mean, did you guys expect?
No, and we have divides across race, across class, across education, gender. It's pretty stark division in the country, and whichever candidate wins, they're going to be presiding over a divided country. But it may be a divided country,
but not a divided government.
Not a divided government.
Apparently, you'll have one-party control
at the state level and at the national level.
I think what's happened in Wisconsin is the Democratic nightmare. It's something that I've sort of felt, and people have disagreed with me. I think this is a red state. I think that the Democratic Party is a shell of itself right now. They're a Madison, Milwaukee party. They have been obliterated outstate. They've been obliterated in the Green Bay area.
What's the reason for that?
I don't know. I've always said that the Democrats do not offer homeowners anything in terms of their policies. Of course they do, but it's homeowners who are driving this. It's in the suburbs, it's outstate, and I think the Democrats just are not appealing to that mass of people. This is a big homeowning state. You have to remember
let's talk
that.
about at the state Senate level. Dan, you've been following some of those races closely. We're going in, we said, well, there's these 2 seats that maybe the Democrats could pick up, but now they may be losing some seats.
Right. There was talk about the race Dan Fine was running for, and he ends up winning that race. And then there was talk about Luther Olson possibly losing, and both of those Republicans end up winning. The focus right now is on 3 races that are undecided. There's Senator Schilling, who is down about 10 points right now to Dane Kapanke, whom she defeated for that seat. Julie Lassa, who's been in the Senate for a while, she's down about 8 points. And then Dave Hansen is also trailing, but all of my sources are saying that Hansen should end up pulling it out. So the other 2, Lassa and Schilling, they could very well lose. And if they do, we'll go from 19, right now it's 19 Republicans, 14 Democrats. It'll move to 21 to 12. It's also possible. The numbers in the Assembly look like they'll be about the same. There was one candidate who lost there.
Right, and these are outstate districts where Trump was apparently doing extremely well.
Right.
And that goes to what you're saying. The Democrats
Shilling's
have become a
lacrosse.
Milwaukee and Madison kind of
lacrosse.
party.
I mean, the Democrats really, they have not gone through a period of soul searching. They've been totally enraged and focused on their anger at Scott Walker for about 6 years. And they are, again, a shell of what they once were, and they are now a minority party that potentially, depending on what happens in the next governor's race, could be a minority party for essentially a generation. I mean, 20 years.
The funny thing is, there is one Democrat who can win statewide in Wisconsin, and that's Barack Obama. And he still got 54% approval rating in the state. People like him. The state has never warmed up to Hillary Clinton. She loses to Obama the first time she runs. She loses in the primary this year, and now she's going to, it appears, lose in the general election.
And I think the Senate race that I covered between Johnson and Feingold, I mean, Johnson ran, the people behind him and Johnson himself ran a tremendous race. Whether they were going to win or lose, they ran the better race. They came out of nowhere, and they were left for dead by the side of the road, and they have...
By their own party.
By their own party, and they have pulled off a truly astonishing
upset. And you talked to him tonight?
I talked to him tonight, and he was surprised by the margin of the vote. That took him by surprise, and he was, I think, a little bit in a daze. I mean, once he absorbed it, he said he went out, he told the truth, and that's why he won the race. I think that he was sort of, he just was himself in the final couple of months of this race, and people saw that, and they liked what they saw.
Well, I think I've compared it to the 92 race, because what you had was, when you turn on TV, nonstop negative ads. And you had a very similar situation in 92 when you had Chakota and Moody and these other people running lots of negative ads. And the person who broke through was Russ Feingold with these different, these sort of offbeat ads that were somewhat humorous. This time you had Ron Johnson running some offbeat, not quite humorous, but lighthearted, personable ads. His closing ad was just him looking in the camera saying, I want to work for you, and I want to be your senator.
He took over a large chunk of his campaign. He had a staff behind him, but he was calling a lot of those shots on those ads that were basically him talking to the camera, or the whiteboard ad, and it brought him back into this race. And I got to tell you, I mean, Dan and I probably agree. The Feingold side, they had a chance to nuke him in the second half of August. Johnson was off the air, and they just did not do it at that point. And
that was in late August.
Yeah, they let him hang around this race, and you never let an opponent hang around the race because you don't know what's going to happen. Look at what happened in Ohio, where Portman put his opponent away early. So,
but you do have to wonder if the state ends up going for Trump.
Whether anything could have happened, yeah.
Right. I mean that the whole mood of the country and of the state was going in a certain direction. And I don't think anyone on Johnson's team, even yesterday, believed he would win by 7 points, which is the number.
Oh no, I don't think anybody. They thought it was going to be a close race. And I have to tell you, coming into today, I have to admit I'm very surprised if Trump wins. But the one thing that sort of stuck in the back of my mind was the Des Moines Register poll out in Iowa that had Trump winning by 7. And I thought to myself, Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan, these states are all kind of similar. And so that one was just, I'm not saying I would call it, I didn't, that one just stuck in the back of my head.
So what do you think happens? Now we have Republicans controlling, they're going to control the Supreme Court, the governor's mansion, and the legislature here, and they're going to have the same, very possibly the same thing at the national level. What happens?
I have no idea. I mean, do you look to what happened in Wisconsin? If you liked it in Wisconsin, you'll like it for the rest of America? I just have no idea.
Well, yeah, what I wonder is how in step the Republican leadership is with Donald Trump on a lot of these things that he's advocating. That's going to be a test when he talks about let's do this and put up trade barriers and other things. Is that going to have the support of the leadership?
No, I think you've had a fracturing of the Republican Party on a national level, but there's not going to be, no one's going to emphasize that, but you've had the white working class who supported the Republicans, mainly those what we used to call Reagan Democrats, rise up and say, what you guys are doing in the party is not benefiting us. These trade deals aren't working for us. A number of these things aren't working for us. So they rebelled, and Trump gave them a message. It's a message that Paul Ryan doesn't agree with, and Mike Pence doesn't agree with it either. So I don't know how they resolve that, but Donald Trump has shown that if he doesn't like you, he'll do his best to get rid of you. So I don't know if there's a party purge coming or what happens now.
Yeah, well, let's show the latest numbers, and then we'll take some questions, and then we'll be back with even more information. But the electoral votes right now, kind of where they were when we started the segment, 244.
Does the 244 include Wisconsin or not?
Well, let's see. We'll get to the map and see in a minute here. Let's see the totals here in Wisconsin for president. The current totals are showing that Donald Trump at 49% to Hillary Clinton's 43%. That gap there, is 100,000 plus votes. Now in the Senate race, of course, that's where Ron Johnson has won. There again, it's showing that 7-point margin Dan just mentioned, 52 to 45%. And the congressional district stayed about that same margin pretty much the whole evening. And now let's look at the map, which is still showing pretty much exactly where it was earlier. So there's still votes coming in these states. That pathway for Hillary Clinton is exceedingly narrow. In some of those states, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, Arizona, that you would need to win. Aside from Nevada, she's trailing in each one of those states.
I think that the narrow path for her would be Michigan and hold New Hampshire, or Michigan and Wisconsin, and then win in the Southwest. It's a very narrow path.
I think she has to actually win all of those and then pick up Arizona. That's what's left in the Southwest. So before we end the segment here, we're going to take a couple questions we've gotten on Facebook and from our viewers tonight. So the first question is, what do tonight's results mean for data, journalism, and polls? Did our journalism fail in some way? Dan, what do you think?
I think some people like to think that politics is like Moneyball, and we can study this and deal with it just by polls. And I don't think that's the case. You can't be sure what the voters think. And I said earlier, either there's a major problem with the polls or a number of people didn't tell the truth when they were talking to the pollsters. We don't know right now. But you can be sure that after the 2012 election, the Republican Party conducted an autopsy of itself. I'm sure journalists will conduct an autopsy of what they were doing with their polling.
I think there's too much of an emphasis on data myself. I'm
the anti-money baller.
I'm not a numbers guy. I look at the numbers, I report the numbers, reported right through the Marquette University poll race. But I'm just not a data guy.
But I do think that the data gives you a picture of the Johnson-Feingold race. I think Feingold was ahead by double digits at a certain point, and that collapsed.
Yeah, well,
and
it's interesting. Some of those polls, if you look back at the recall election, some of those, the Marquette Law School poll was pretty much right on the money, right? So people trusted the poll. So I think it'll be a lot of interesting discussions about what was missed here, or was it truly some last-minute swing that caused all the?
So the swing would have to be they had Hillary up 5 points, 6 points, 6 points.
Yeah.
The final poll had her up 6 points, and right now she's down by 2 or 3. Yeah. That would be a major swing over less than a week's time. I'm thinking that there's one group of people, or there's certain people who were not picked up in some of these polls.
I know that the Johnson campaign, what they told me they were trying to do, obviously do well in the WOW counties, but their plan was to sweep from Green Bay and across the state and outstate. I don't know what the polling is like in all of those areas. And they also saw a universe of voters that they called Walker Tammy Baldwin voters. Now, what they were saying is that Walker, in the recall, that people voted for Walker in the recall. They might not have agreed with him, but they didn't like the politics of it. And they voted for Baldwin against Thompson, not necessarily because they 100% agreed with her, but they didn't want Tommy back. These are people who just don't like politics. So maybe there's some method to the madness.
The biggest thing that could have happened, the only way the poll could, I think, be accurate, is it had claimed that it had found that only 76% of Republican women were planning to vote for Donald Trump. If that number jumped incredibly from 76 to something else, then that would explain how he was able to pick up all of this.
Let's take one other question. This one is about the Senate race. He says it's more of a statement, but there's a sort of a question implied. Is I don't recall Feingold running a commercial pointing out his accomplishments during his 18 years in D.C. Was there a commercial like that? And if not, why not? That was part of the theme.
Actually, we and when he was in for an edit board, I asked the question, what were your major accomplishments in your 18 years in the Senate? And he cited a number of things that I had no idea what they were. Do you remember that?
One of them was the lake shore up north. I mean, it was 3 things that I was scratching my head about.
So the argument against Feingold was twofold. One, that he's a hypocrite, that he said one thing and he did another, and they hit him on that throughout the election. The other thing was that he had accomplished nothing, that he didn't have a resume. And I don't think they responded very effectively to either point. And I think Feingold was somewhat dismissive of those points because he didn't believe either one was true. But they continue to pound away at those things. If you did ask Ron Johnson the same question, he actually ticked things off. I had 23 bills that I passed through my committee. Our committee approved it. We did this, and this. And that's why I've said repeatedly that I think the major criticism of the Feingold campaign in terms of content was that they didn't give a very compelling explanation for why.
I think they had 25 ads, 25 television ads. That's a lot of ads. It's a lot of messages you're throwing out at people. Don't forget, millions of dollars came into this race late, most of it coming down right on Russ Feingold's head to drive up his negatives. So we don't know what effect that might have had with some of those wavering voters. But again, I think maybe you just step back and you say the Democratic Party of Wisconsin is in deep trouble. And this is symptomatic of the trouble. Losing these outstate Senate races, symptomatic of trouble. You cannot be a Madison, Milwaukee party in this state and expect to win big races.
You know what else is in trouble? Obamacare.
Obamacare's in a lot of trouble.
And you know, that was one of the heavy themes in the final days against Hillary Clinton here and against Russ Feingold here. I have no idea how effective, but I know we were inundated with ads from a number of different directions criticizing them for that.
All right, well, that's a good point to leave our discussion for now. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back, I'm going to say, at 11:45 with another update on how things are going this evening.
There's a scenario where it could be 269 apiece.
Right.
It goes into the House of Representatives. Our heads will explode at that point. Who knows?
For that to happen, she would have to hold all of Maine, New Hampshire, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and I think that would do it. I think that's where you get to.
And Wisconsin, I mean, she didn't come here.
No.
She did in March.
Yeah,
she was here in March.
It's just.
But the surrogates didn't really come here. I mean,
It's
the
just,
big names didn't come here
It's
either.
completely stunning to me.
Yeah.
I mean, they just, if it holds true now, they gave away a state that hasn't gone Republican, or the Republicans won the state that hadn't gone Republican since 1984.
Yeah, since Reagan's second
most
term.
of the voters who voted in this election today, I don't think voted in that election.
Yeah,
here
right.
in this state. So it is.
Well, that
truly
raises a
stunning.
point. That raises a question I was going to ask you, Bill, and Dan chime in here too. But a lot of people, and I think all of us, missed this surge of white working class voters who were likely many of them non-college educated. How did we miss that?
We just did. I mean,
I don't think we missed them. I think that we knew that. I mean, the Trump movement's been driven by them, but and the Republican Party has been.
Would they turn out, though?
Yeah, would they turn out, and were there a sufficient number of them to get Trump elected?
Yes,
because we kept on saying,
yes.
but we kept on thinking, there's enough Hispanics in Florida who will come out and vote. So there were all these different situations where we thought there were others who would come out and counter them or reduce the number. And, you know, this isn't a good long-term strategy. This is probably 70% of the election this time, for the first time, below 70% will be probably white voters. But still, today, that they carry the day, it appears.
But also, if you have an election, conventional wisdom, you have an election in Wisconsin where you get 3.1 million voters to the polls.
It's a Democrat.
Advantage Democrat. But if it's now 3.1 million of the polls advantage Republican, they have found.
So every
new
2 years,
voters.
we have a meeting and then we have a discussion here. And when it's a non-presidential year, we say, Wisconsin is a red state because we just elected a Republican governor. And then 2 years later, we say Wisconsin's a blue state because we always elected Democrat for president. So what do we say now? Are we a red state or a blue state?
Oh, I think we're a red state. I think there's no doubt now. I
I
mean, with
think we're a
the
red state.
overwhelming majority of the legislature, even with gerrymandering, you know, just whatever, they just blew out some Democratic incumbents.
That weren't Trump?
I think you can confidently say we're not a purple state because we're an either-or state. We are Dane County, Milwaukee County, which is blue, and then everything else.
Which is red, bright red.
It reminds us of Representative Newman, Mark Newman.
Yes, the man who won 70 counties and lost a race.
To Russ Feingold, but that didn't happen this time.
So I'm looking at Pennsylvania's vote tallies. 97.4% of the vote reported in Pennsylvania, and as we said, if she loses Pennsylvania or Michigan or any of these other states, it's over. And she is behind by about 35,000 votes. I'll tell you one thing that the Democrats can't blame this on. They can't blame it on Gary Johnson.
No. They have
or
to,
Jill Stein.
They have to, whatever. I mean, the Democrats got the one candidate who Hillary Clinton presumably could defeat. Yeah. She was not a very good candidate. It was pretty obvious throughout. And, it appears, it's not over, it appears that the one candidate she could defeat may have just beaten.
And it says something about conventional politics in America, because the Democrats did have a huge get-out-the-vote operation. Here they went to like 400,000 doors. But it was almost completely through the sheer force of his personality and celebrity that he was able to get a number of white working class people to be motivated to come out and vote for him.
And he did this also without what you would think of as conventional advertising. They advertised late, very little money, for a national race. Yeah. His Twitter account was his main avenue until they took it away from him.
So I think everyone in the media has something to think about here, but I do have to think that some of the cable news outlets, and I'm thinking here, you, CNN, when you put a candidate on before the rally and you show the podium that's empty for minutes at a time, he got a lot of free media, that's what I'm trying to say.
Well, and to be honest, he deserved it. He brought ratings numbers and for them, and he deserved
no doubt
it.
About
he
that.
was an interesting, mercurial candidate, whatever you want to say about him. He knew how to create good TV. The other side didn't. And we're in these 8 to 12 year cycles.
And he exploited a division within the Republican Party. I mean, the person who actually saw this and pointed this out several years ago was Thomas Frank, who wrote "What's the Matter with Kansas?" Yeah. So all of these, his argument was that the Republican Party sold social issues to the white working class voters while doing stuff that was harmful to them economically. Yeah. Well, Trump went in and acknowledged that the Republican Party had policies that weren't benefiting the white working class. But he didn't offer them social issues. He offered them different political and policy changes, including differences in trade, differences in immigration, some other things that appealed to them that weren't abortion and same-sex marriage.
Let's not overlook the sort of authoritarian nature of Trump, too. He offered them himself. I will be...
I mean, he offered a lot of things. He offered easy solutions to difficult questions. He offered, as we were saying, the exact opposite of what Ronald Reagan offered, morning in America. He offered midnight in America. Yeah. It's a very, it's a terrible situation. Only one man can save you, and I am that man. So, I mean, he offered a number of things. He offered very little in terms of policy. And in fact, there was this meeting in May 12th of this year where Paul Ryan came in and tried to explain the budget to him. And after 5 minutes, after 5 minutes, then Trump says, enough of that. You can be in charge of the money stuff for me when I'm president. So, he's not a detail guy.
I don't think we can actually even say what his policies are.
Right.
I really
we talked about this earlier.
I really don't think
completely agree.
Some people say, well, look, you know who he'll appoint to the Supreme Court because he had 11 names and he put them out there. It turns out those names came from the Heritage Foundation and from the Federal Society, and he had no comment on those things before tweeting them out. So those aren't even his names.
And let's in a lot of ways, I mean, it reminds me of 1980. It reminds me of 2000. This thing isn't necessarily over yet, and there could be another twist and turn late. Who knows where this thing is going to end up?
Well, and let's end on that note. So stay with JS Online throughout the night and tomorrow morning for the latest up-to-date numbers. Stay here at JS Online. For Dan Bice and for Bill Glauber and for Bill Schultz, who's run the cameras all night, I'm David Haynes for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel.